All right. Thank you all for making it back in. I figure by now in the program you're getting tired of me, so the good news is the next two panels I'm going to hand off to other people, and then I'm going to go take a nap in the back, I think. No, I won't. So Daryl's going to do this one. You met Daryl Vigil briefly this morning. If you know Daryl well enough to know his email, you know he's the water guy at the Hickory Apache Nation, and he's a friend and a colleague for many years now. He's a good man. He's a good man who's been given an impossible task, I fear, but of leading this panel, this amazing panel. This is awesome. And it'll be roughly an hour of presentations and roughly an hour of questions through our process, and we'll see how that goes. And Daryl, I don't think you need anything else from me, but just to wish you luck and talk a bit.
Good afternoon, everybody, and hope your lunch was good. And just want to thank you all again for being here. And very, very excited and moved that I get to facilitate this particular session. And I think Charles his heart would be moved as well in terms of, that this is happening here today. And just the presence, the large presence of the indigenous community in the Colorado River Basin being represented here today for this particular panel. And we've called it the evolving role of the tribes. I'm going to just spend a little bit of time going over some little bit of context because, I mean, it's the emergence of tribal engagement and participation has been a relatively recent thing, and you heard a lot of reasons why. And so what we're hoping to do is go through this slide real quickly. I'm going to have the tribal leadership introduce themselves first, and then we'll start on one end or the other. Each tribal leader or tribal representative will talk about, what's important to them based on the conversation around all of the things that are currently going on in the basin. I think at the heart of this, for me, has been, a calculated effort really to try to, not try, but to have the basin acknowledge tribal sovereignty and self-determination. And I think over the last 10 years or so, a lot of the leadership that's sitting up here on the panel, absolutely has moved that bar in terms of the knowledge and the education and the recognition of the unique nuances of tribal water rights and what role they play in the basin. And for this, I hadn't said this in a long time, and I told Crystal I was going to use it. But and for this particular conversation, it becomes really germane again about, if you know one tribe, you know one tribe. I spent years saying that because, there's been this effort to think that there's one tribal solution, and you have 30 tribal sovereigns in the Colorado River Basin, beautiful, distinctly different from each other culturally, linguistically, geographically, and to think, that there's an Indian solution, really dishonors, that individuality and the uniqueness of each one of those tribes. And so I think over the last, 10, 12 years that I've been involved in, there's been that calculated effort to inform and educate about the indigenous populations within your states, within your communities. And I think we're at a pivotal point, as we heard from the federal representatives today and the senator and the incredible moving talk by Nora McDowell. And just the facts that, we were presented by Brad Udall and about the importance of tribal engagement. And part of that reason is that the tribes collectively hold rights to 3.4 million acre feet of Colorado River water, and that's 25% and increasing because of hydrology. And so, starting in 2009, 2012, the basin study took place the 10 Tribes Partnership of the Colorado River started a process called the Tribal Water Study, which is really the one of its first of its kind, where the 10 Tribes Partnership got to tell their story. And it was consistent with the broader basin study in terms of, how the tribes saw them developing their own water rights into the future. And so for the last 6 or 7 years or so, we've seen that when tribes are engaged and they have an opportunity to participate, they participate meaningfully, and it impacts the broader basin positively. And so when we're talking about, now about post-2026 involvement, absolutely at the heart of that is structural inclusion. 07 guidelines we were excluded from. The 1922 compact says it doesn't apply to us, and those kind of things. So, we really have an opportunity to be able to reconcile some past in terms of the recognition of tribal water rights, and that's inside the recognition of tribal sovereignty and self-determination. And so most recently, especially with this current administration, the federal government has really stepped up their efforts in terms of tribal engagement and tribal involvement, and is actively working and thinking about how that structure will look like post-2026, and tribes are involved in that conversation. They've developed numerous processes for communication that hadn't existed before, like this Basin Tribal Information Exchange that happens on a real regular basis, where technical legal information is shared with the tribes that want to participate in that. And then most recently, as mentioned today by Commissioner Tootin, about going through the SEIS process, that each tribe that wanted a consultation was afforded that, in terms of that government to government relationship that we were talking about. So that becomes really instrumental, because just a few years ago, with a different administration, there was talk about, how can we do 30 consultations at one time? Well, it can be done. And that was something that this administration and some of the current government activity is actually providing. And it's the best that it ever has been in terms of that engagement. And so we really hope to forward that. And you'll probably hear that from the leadership today about, creating a place where, the tribal sovereigns can engage in dialogue and decision-making about their own water and about decision-makings in the Colorado River Basin. And so some of these sovereign-to-sovereign dialogues that are going on right now that we have the privilege to facilitate is the Basin-wide Tribe States dialogue. This started about a year ago now, and it's with the 7 Basin States principal water managers and a group of advisory team from the Basin Tribal Coalition have a monthly meeting to engage and talk about and share information about Colorado River policy. That had never been engaged before, and that dialogue, as you know, the relationship with tribes and the states that they reside in sometimes is pretty tenuous and maybe doesn't exist sometimes. So this is really forwarded an opportunity for that conversation to happen. The Upper Basin Tribe States dialogue, the Upper Colorado River Commission has been meeting for almost over a year now with the 5 tribal sovereigns in the Upper Basin. And the UCRC has been actually traveling to the host tribes so that they get to see each one of these reservations themselves and to see the unique challenges that we may have that you wouldn't otherwise know unless you actually travel to the reservation. And then we have, and again, a historic conversation, and historic in the nature that the Upper Colorado River Commission and the 5 Upper Basin tribal sovereigns are looking at ways to formalize that relationship so that, an understanding that this is something that's going to continue on into the future. And then there's this Upper Basin dialogue that kind of kicked it all off almost 2 years ago with the 5 Upper Basin tribal sovereigns meeting with a host of NGO conservation groups, specifically kind of in the Upper Basin or working up in the Upper Basin, but we have a few others that do kind of basin-wide work. They created a joint vision together, and they've done consensus work in terms of building a framework for joint letters to sign on to. And so really adding that tribal component to the environmental component that absolutely that we hear over and over again that needs to be addressed post-2026. And then structural change. Absolutely something that, the conversation's been about, in terms of like, how do we get structural inclusion, given that, most settlements, decrees and whatnot, and tribal capacity, is either 100 years behind or the law is over 100 years old. And so we have a situation where there is no structural place to engage in any of the conversation right now at all. And so one of the big wins in our mind has been, inclusion into the DROA process in the Upper Basin. And that was purely driven by the tribes in the Upper Basin themselves, and then concurred and signed off on by the Bureau of Reclamation and supported by the UCRC as well. But it really, it gives a structural inclusion to all the working groups. And that's the first structural inclusion that's occurred in this current time that we're working under. And so there's been this gradual evolving of tribal participation and involvement because it needs to happen for a lot of different reasons. And hydrology absolutely has pushed us to have the conversations about human justice, inclusion, and equity. And those are at the heart of those conversations that we're having about post-2026. And so, it is my honor, absolute honor, to start to have the tribal leadership and the representatives or tribal representatives introduce themselves. And then afterwards, we'll start on one side or the other. We'll see who wants to go first. And then we'll have tribal leadership and the representation go for about 3 or 4 minutes each to talk about those things that are really germane and important to them right now. And then we hope to spend the rest of the time, once we go through all the speakers, to really have some conversation and some questions. Again, understanding the uniqueness, and you'll hear that. There'll probably be some common threads, but each one will have a unique situation that's individual to their own tribe. And so I'm very honored, that I get to lead this panel. I'm very honored that I get to work with these folks, and I know their commitment in terms of to their own tribes first, of course, but then to the solution in the broader basin. So Chris, maybe we could start with you to introduce yourself, and then we can go down the line.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Christopher Tabee. I represent the Uncompahgre band of the Ute Indian tribes in northeastern Utah, the land base of 4.4 million acres. I also represent the business committee. I also represent the business committee as the vice chairman for the Ute tribe. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Dwight Lamaisva. I'm vice chairman of the Colorado River Indian tribes. There's 4 tribes on our reservation, and we all get along now. That hasn't always been the case. And I'm hoping that perhaps this organization, these people, all of us in the Upper Basin, Lower Basin, California, all the states, all the irrigation districts, we can all start rowing together in the same direction.
In my language. Good afternoon or good day to all of you here today. I'm Robert McGill, chairman of the Auction Indian community. We're located about 40 miles south of Phoenix, Arizona, and we're a 22,000 acre tribe, 16,000 designated to agriculture. So again, the need for water is our priority. So I really thank all of you for being here, and again, the conference for having us. Obviously, it's very important to sit down with tribal leaders to get their perspective and the way we live our lives and how important shudak is, my language is water, very, very precious. So thank you.
Good afternoon. Kutat Movat, Jordan Joaquin, president of the Kutsan Indian tribe. My reservation is located majority in California, but we have our reservations in Yuma, Arizona as well. I'm honored to be here among my tribal leaders. There was a question earlier posed, when you need to have tribal input, reach out to Daryl, and but reach out to us, because I don't speak for all tribes, but when it comes to tribes at the table, tribes are going to become the table. We no longer are just going to be put in the back table, the side table. We're going to be at the table to become the table for solutions and resolutions as well. So I'm honored to be here. Very good discussion. And I have to say one more thing. I'm glad we're here the first day. Usually we're here the very last day when everyone has their luggage ready to fly out. So we're making improvement. So thank you.
Yate She'e Crystal Tuli Cordova. I'm a principal hydrologist with the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources. I am representing today over 27,000 square miles that straddles the upper and the lower Colorado River Basin. We have lands in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. And when you think about transboundary issues, hopefully you think about the Navajo Nation being in the middle of it all. We definitely have multiple water uses, past, present, and future water uses for multiple purposes and projects. We definitely continue to work, as the commissioner had described, the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project, continue to develop water across the Navajo Nation, particularly in the face of climate change, as Mr. Udall had described about, the need to be able to create that security and sustainability, thinking innovatively about solutions that we can be able to propose for the future. And I know that as we continue to think not about what has been done the past 100 years, but think about what we can do for the next 100 years, we can think innovatively about how to be able to create a future that continues to support the, over 40 million people that use the Colorado River Basin water.
Good afternoon. My name is Alice Walker. I'm here on behalf of the Kaibab Band of Paiute Indians of Arizona. They are located all the way north in Arizona, adjacent to the Utah border, also experiencing transboundary issues and transportation of water across those lines that were drawn not only by the creation of the states, but also by the law of the river itself. So thank you for listening to me today on behalf of the Kaibab Band of Paiute Indians. Thank you.
It's good, Tosh. Anya Namchugat, Governor Stephen Roe Lewis, the Gila River Indian Community in southern Arizona. We're about 24,000 tribal members. We're doing everything we can, just like all my fellow tribes here, to model good, cutting-edge water management in the face of drought. Where we're looking at solar covered canals. We have over 150 miles. We would be the first, and we're looking at, hopefully, I have my attorney, Jason Howder, who's also a tribal member of the Gila River Indian Community, with me as well. And we would be the first, not only tribe, but first entity in the Western Hemisphere to do solar over canals. And so we're working in a partnership with the federal government. And it's about a partnership, a respectful partnership with the federal government. They have that trust responsibility. I also want to thank to their homelands, the indigenous peoples here of Colorado, Southern Ute and Ute Mountain. Thank you. Thank you for welcoming us to your homelands here in this very critical panel. Thank you very much. Zapo.
Good afternoon. I'm Lorelei Cloud, Vice Chairman of the Southern Indian Tribe. I am representing also my two bands of Utes, the Mawatch and Kapota bands. First, just real quick, welcome to Ute country, because this is my homeland, along with Christopher Tabee from Ute Tribe. This is where his band of Utes once lived. So, water is very critical to us. I'm down in the southwest corner of the state, next to my sister tribe, the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. We're a very small tribe, small reservation. We get most of our water off of the San Juan tributary. Again, we're looking forward to all the conversations here today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Peter Ortego. I'm the General Counsel for the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. Our chairman, Manuel Hart, sends his apologies for not being able to be here and speak with you, so you're going to have to put up with me, I guess. The Ute Mountain Ute Tribe is located in the southwest corner of the state. We're also in New Mexico and Utah. We also have one of the largest ranches in Colorado and one of the largest farms in Colorado. We settled our Colorado water rights back in 1988. We've been pursuing our water rights in New Mexico now for about 30 years, and we just now started pursuing our water rights in Utah.
Good afternoon. Steve Tidla was he kun hwania ashonta. No hera altsari chi no nanatan huyati in derantene. Go ero tsai by herantsera. Thank you for welcoming us to the indigenous lands here, to the Ute. We honor you. We're humble. My name is Steve Tidla from San Carlos Apache Tribe, Arizona. We are located in eastern Arizona. About 17,000 Apaches over there in eastern Arizona. We have CAP water rights, and we have other rights in the Arizona and the river systems. So I thank the committee for putting this together, getting all of you honorable people together, and all my esteemed colleagues here, tribal leaders. I'm not a tribal leader. I'm just a simple attorney. That's all I am. I was sitting back there relaxing. The chairman calls me a while ago and says, hey, you can speak for me pretty soon. I said, what? So here I am. We'll think of something though. Thank you.
Mike, my name is Shenandoah Anderson. I come from and represent the Shivwits Band of Paiutes, which is in southern Utah around the St. George area. We were relocated from Arizona, so we're kind of stuck in the middle of upper and lower because we live in Utah, which is all upper, but yet we represent and have water rights in the lower. So our tribe it consists of 5 bands in Utah. And Shivwits is the only one out of all of the bands that have water rights. And so the bands, well, the tribe PITU has been representing whenever it comes to any water meetings. And so our tribal council said that we need to put our foot in the door. So that's why I'm here. I'm kind of new to all of this. I'm here to learn, here to soak up all of your knowledge, tribal knowledge, everyone here, because we need to have a voice. We had 150 river miles of the Colorado River for the Shivwits Band, and we were relocated to Utah. So we are kind of wanting to go back home because our tribal people and our kids are losing touch with the river. The river is our puwa, it is our power, it is our blood veins of the whole world, because our ocean woman created the earth in our legend stories. And so we believe that the water is power. And so that's why I'm here today, is to learn and to take knowledge back to our people on who we are, and to just have our foot in the door more, because I'm pretty sure none of you have really heard of who the Shivwits Band of Paiutes are. So we're here and we're not leaving. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Avery Tafoya from the Hickory Apache Nation. We're from New Mexico, the northern central part of New Mexico. Before I start off, I'd like to introduce Legislative Councilwoman Lisa Vigil and also Councilwoman Francine Manuel. And I'm honored to be here along with all these distinguished Indigenous leaders, as well as with all of you. I look forward to meaningful dialogue and hope to find a solution long-term so we can continue life, because as we know, water is life and we must continue. Thank you.
Loloma. My name is Dale Sinqua. I'm representing the Hopi tribe along with my colleague here, Dwayne Sikakaku. Dwayne, where are you at? Oh, I believe he's upstairs. He told me he was going upstairs watching. But we were delegated to come here by the Tribal Council to represent Hopi here in this dialogue here. I would like to take the time right now to thank our Creator for answering our Hopi ceremonies and our prayers, which at the heart of everything that we do is water. And we have been answered, and it gave us a little reprieve, temporary break to figure out what we're going to do as a group. And that's what we're here for. We're here for dialogue, meaningful dialogue, to contribute to managing what resources we have to benefit everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, tribal leadership and tribal representatives. And I just wanted to point out that it's an incredible testament for the tribal leadership to take the time to be here. I mean, that really shows the level of importance because if you don't know, tribal leadership usually deals with all levels of tribal governance and incredibly busy. And we're talking about a capacity divide, the recognition of the importance of this dialogue, I think, is proven by the fact that we have tribal leadership here. And I think it's a testament also that the tribal leadership that isn't here thought it was important enough to send representatives. So I really appreciate that. And so we're going to go on to the second portion of it, where each one of the tribal representatives is welcome to give a 3 to 4 minute statement. And I don't know what we decided, if we're going to start over here with Chris or with Dale, or with Dale? Okay.
Hopi's primary interest in the situation we're in Colorado River is our unsettled water rights. We want to ensure that that's addressed and that's not set aside. It's kind of odd that us sovereigns that are here have been established before the United States, and then we get labeled as to when you settle your water rights as to what order that you're going to receive those rights in. And we feel as sovereigns, it's time for the everybody here, this conversation, that we take a seat at the table when the discussions happen. Also, this drought here is just a recent drought in Hopi's long history. We've lived through drought. We're here. We're still alive. We've managed somehow, if you can see our footprints, anthropologic footprints that go all over this country, where we have dealt with situations like this, where drought causes political upheaval and all the other things that come along with it, and we have to figure a way of how to continue on, and sometimes results in migration. But now we're in this world here, and where are we going to migrate to? Our community has got larger. We have a larger community that involves, what was the number, 40 million people that depend on this water for power and running systems and economic development. So now Hopi's not just in the conversation with our communities. We're in a conversation that encompasses this whole region right here that depends on that water. So we have experience, and they're just very simple philosophies that Hopi has understood. Sami anangwa and nami anangwa. How you work for the people and how you gather your assets as a group to make those things happen. So now it encompasses all of you. How are we going to settle this thing? We need to be in the conversation to do that. So what does Hopi have to contribute? Our long history, our experience with drought. And then also what we have is at the heart of us all, is our ceremonies and our prayers. I don't know anybody. There are some people who don't believe in that. But that's what defines Hopi. Our ceremonies and prayers evolve around water. And if you look at our ceremonies, it's intricate and it's a yearly calendar, and it took a while for that to come to be. But we realize the region that we're in and the importance of water. And if I didn't stand up here and say that Hopi will contribute through our prayers and ceremony, I don't think I could call myself an Hopi. So that's what Hopi can contribute along with the dialogue. Thank you.
Good afternoon. You know, as far as Hickory goes, we're kind of fortunate that we do have water. We actually do have a river that goes through our northern part of our reservation. We also have fishing lakes. But, you know, as we look at the bigger picture, and I'm pretty sure this goes across the board with everybody here, and the ones that are looking for water rights, is we have to be diligent and watch over what we do have. And that's water rights, water settlements. You know, we have to manage these so they're not taken away. The future is uncertain, and we don't know what the government's going to do. If this drought continues, as well as the global warming, they could take that away from us because of the criticalness of the water and what's needed for the 47 million. So as we move forward, you know, we, as Hickory also, we have contributed to the Gallup Water Project, where we gave water and helping Navajo get water to their people also, as well as ours on our southern part. But what we bring to the table is knowledge, and a lot of that knowledge that we have is from that gentleman sitting over there, Mr. Vigil. Our water rights, our water department, everything Mr. Vigil has done for us, and we are eternally grateful to you, sir. And I can't think of any other better person to lead this coalition, the initiatives and all that. As we move forward, we want to be at the table, and as Indigenous leaders, we have to be at the table. Our input is just as important as all of you guys's. And this just doesn't affect us, Indigenous people, it affects everybody global wide. You know, and as we move forward also, water is going to become just as sought after as gold, and maybe surpass that in the need for it and for us to survive. So we look forward to sitting at the table. We look forward to having our voice heard, and look forward to, like I said, meaningful, hard, truthful dialogue to move along, because a lot of lives are at stake. And, you know, we all have to be at that table to make these decisions. As stated before, future generations are going to depend on this. So I look forward to sitting at the table, and I look forward to having our voices heard. Thank you.
I would like to give a little historical background on our Shivwits band and the Southern Paiute people. I am an independent consultant for Southern Paiutes, and I educate you all on who we are. Because if you look up Southern Paiute and you look on the internet, you see us in our sad stage of with our hairs chopped off to here, because when we mourn the deaths of our immediate families, so we cut our hairs. And so if you look at all our historical accounts where we are in mourning, and all of the river tribes that were along the Virgin River and the smaller streams were wiped out. We were relocated into St. George, but the original band that was there was removed. They were all murdered and killed because of the water. And so we are water people, and I'm fortunate enough to say that we've survived because we had a vast desert that we could hide in. Not like a lot of these smaller towns that had the farmland that everyone wanted. In our historical books need to change, and we've tried that because nobody wants to face the fact that we were killed for our water. We were killed for our land. And historically, the schools teach the kids that the pioneers came in and taught the Paiutes how to farm. And that's sad that some of our own children don't even know that we taught them how to farm. We taught them how to survive. But yet it's so twisted in our history books that we don't have a voice. And I want to change that. That's why I go to BLM, I go to Fish and Wildlife. I go there to educate you all on who we really are, not what you read in the books, not what you read on the internet, because that's not who we are. Those were written by pioneers who changed the history to what they wanted to fit into their books. And so I think one of the steps that we need to do as tribes is to bring our cultural resource managers to these meetings and educate you all who we are. Because we can just stand here and you just talk about our rights now, but you don't know who we are as a people. You don't know where we come from. You don't know what this water means to us. You don't know what our culture means to us, that we're losing it all, and we need to educate our kids. You need to educate your own children, because you see the world today, how it is, where the tribes, not the tribes, but the nations are against each other because of the color of your skin. And that needs to change, and it starts with the tribes culturally talking about who we are, to change that perspective of looking at us on the internet and saying, well, they're poor people. I'm actually proud to be from a poor tribe that didn't have a lot. I remember growing up, our elders would say, you didn't really have a lot. We don't really have a lot of ceremonies. We don't have a lot of, I guess, things to make us like a warring tribe where we did this, we battled this, we have so many badges. We were just a simple tribe. We planted, we hunted. We have a legend where we went up into the mountains as mountain sheep and came down as people. So anytime you see the petroglyphs all along the Colorado River, they're talking about me. They're talking about my ancestors. We are the mountain sheep. We are the deer. We have deer songs and mountain sheep songs from the Shivwits Plateau all the way down to Chemehuevi that talk about these song ranges. We didn't have clans. We had songs, territorial songs. And if you came into our territory, we would ask you, which song do you belong to? And that's how we distinguished our territories, by our songs. So we were song people. And so we were simple, but we had all of the knowledge that we needed. We had every song, every trail had a song. Whether it talked about a deer, it talked about a rabbit, it talked about a green rock sitting, it talked about the lava flowing. We say we've been here since time immemorial, and when they talk about the Anasazi, we say that's us. We had to adapt to change, because when the Spanish people came in and they took our children and our women for slavery, that we couldn't have those homes no more. We couldn't have pueblos. We had to be on the run constantly. We had to hide. And so we have the wiki-ups today because of that change that we went through. And so I'm just here to educate you all of who we are as all of the tribes, that we do have a history. It's not just standing up here talking about the present. We need to talk about the past, because that's how we're all connected, and all of our tribes need to come together as tribal people, as cultural people, to connect to the land, because the water is our power, the air is our power. All of these elements that you see around us from the ground, everything is our power, and it's all connected. We say that if you don't use the land, it'll disappear. If you don't use the water, it'll disappear. And because like in Lake Mead, my husband's from that area, Moapa. He's a neighboring tribe to the Shivwits. And we have to pay to even go to Lake Mead. And a lot of times they fight with us and we show them our tribal ID, but a lot of times they won't let us through. So we have to fight to go to our own waters to pray to our water. And I was told by my elders that if you don't pray to the elements, it'll disappear. And that's how I feel, that's what I feel is happening today, is that we're losing that connection as tribes to the land, and that we need to bring that back. We need to fight with Fish and Wildlife. We need to fight with BLM, that we need to not fight, but we need to work with them, because they always say tribal consultation. And we hear about it later, they made these decisions. And we said, where was the tribal consultation? And they would say, oh, we phoned you, but you didn't answer. So that was considered tribal consultation. And that's what we fight with all the time, is that we need to work together, to bring the tribes together, to educate you all on who we are, and that this power needs to return. And that's one way to do it, is through our culture, that we need to connect through our culture to bring back the water, to remove the drought. The Southern Paiutes, well, the Shivwits, I heard when I was younger that there's a prophecy that the Great Salt Lake will one day flood up to the original line. So we have that. And so one day, maybe the drought will be over and the water will cover the whole city. But that's a prophecy that I heard years ago that I'm waiting for to happen. But hopefully we have water that will return, and that's through prayer, and that's through our tribes coming together. Thank you.
Good afternoon again, Steve Tidla from San Carlos Apache. As I told you, we are located in eastern Arizona, about 2 hours east of Phoenix if you get on the freeway there. And we have CAP water rights. So as you know, the CAP, Colorado River, they have a CAP pipeline that extends from Colorado River and then goes through Phoenix and down to Tucson. But it doesn't go to our area. We're in the mountainous country of eastern Arizona, so CAP water line doesn't come to us. So the way we get the water is we have to do exchanges with people along the canal or along the Colorado River. So in this case, we have interests in the use of the Colorado River. But before we go there, I wanted to do a little honor of the late Charles Wilkinson. I noticed you people were talking about him, and I got to meet with him. I met Charles a few years back. We had dinner together at a conference down in Phoenix, and he was very sympathetic of tribal water interests. And so we got along well there. And the last thing he said to me was, let's get together. I'm thinking of a project that I want to work with you guys on. Let's get together soon. I said, okay, let's do that. Well, years and years passed. He got busy, I got busy. And I was thinking to meet him again up here and talk to him again, but that is not to be so. So all honor to Charles Wilkinson. God bless his soul. At any rate, I'm glad that the committee and the government and state interests all are interested in working together now, and tribes are going to be at the table now. So I'm glad about that. I wanted to tell you a little bit about history about our tribe, San Carlos Apache. We have some water interests in the Gila River called the Globe Equity Decree of 1935. And what happened there was that the federal government filed litigation in the Gila River against a lot of parties that were involved there. And we were not at the table. The government represented us, I guess, but we didn't think they did a good job. That's why all we got was 6,000 acre feet from that Globe Equity Decree. We were not even at the table. We were not at the litigation table. We were not at the negotiation table when they talked with all the state of Arizona and all the different interests involved. Now things are different and we are at the table. So I think that's good as far as all the parties involved here are concerned. Now with regard to the Gila River, the 6,000 acre feet, we can't even get that because upstream farmers, if you know the map of Arizona, that Gila River runs from New Mexico down into Arizona, down to Safford, Thatcher, Pima, and down to San Carlos and downstream of us. The upstream farmers and ranchers use all the water. They have thousands of wells extending all the way into New Mexico. So that by the time the water gets to us, all we get is the very poor water quality and quantity. So the water that we're entitled to under the Globe Equity Decree, we can't even use right now. So we have to use all sources of water that we can. So we did a contract with the BOR CAP project dating in 1980. We have some rights to the Black River, the Salt River. We did a settlement with them in 1992. And so we signed a contract with the BOR in 1980 for them to develop water infrastructure for us so that we could get some water to our reservation. Well, from 1980 to now, no infrastructure has been developed. We've been talking on and on with them, but in the most recent administration, I think finally we have some movement. It's been over 40 years, so hopefully in the very short term, we can get things done in the current administration, under President Biden, under Secretary Haaland, under the BOR commissioner. Things are, I think, moving forward, so I'm glad of it from our tribe. Now, with regard to the CAP, the chairman told me to speak here, so I'm going to use his letter. So bear with me if you can. He was talking to the Arizona legislature here, and I wanted to just go through a summary. He made recommendations to the state of Arizona, I think can apply to other states as well. He said that we call upon Arizona legislatures to transcend politics and make tough, realistic decisions. First, water policy, can no longer be controlled by special interests, he said. Second, it is essential and obvious that the legislature's first order of business should be to call a special second session focused on reforming Arizona's archaic water laws. But he was disappointed in that because all they did was form a committee. He said that the legislature must embrace a fundamental philosophy that encourages water conservation and sustainability. Arizona must live within its means. He said, third, we must ask the legislature to encourage water conservation in housing and municipal use by offering progressive tax cuts to real estate developers and CAP municipal and industrial contractors that reduce water consumption in new and replacement housing and municipal and industrial facilities. Similarly, water users should be rewarded for instituting sustainable water consumption through rainwater harvesting and storage, water treatment, and use of gray water in irrigation systems. Fourth, he said, we also must reduce groundwater consumption. What he's saying that if you reduce water usage in the Colorado River, people are going to go to groundwater usage. They're going to increase it. So he's saying one goes with the other. So he said we must reduce groundwater consumption. The legislature, he's referring to Arizona, must sanction a moratorium on transfers of groundwater from one source to another location without first studying the impact on the proposed source of the groundwater and the location to which the water will be exported and used. Arizona cannot afford unrestricted groundwater pumping, which will result in depletion of the water supply and instability of land surface features. Fifth, he said we need regulation. Groundwater pumping is largely unregulated in Arizona right now, despite the 1980 Groundwater Management Act and the creation of active management areas near urban centers. Most groundwater remains nearly free in Arizona right now. Six, he said, we need laws to prevent foreign interests from taking advantage of Arizona's foolish economic policy that undervalues our most precious natural resources. He said that specifically the legislature needs to suspend the long-time shell game of issuing so-called certificates of assured water supply for developers. In the face of this drought, these assurances are meaningless at best and deceptive at their core. Certificates of assured water supply are not the solution, nor are they a guarantee that water will exist 100 years from now. He said, special consideration should be given to foreign out-of-state special interests to consider. For example, Saudi Arabia, largest dairy company, Fondamonte, is right here in Arizona for that very reason, free water. Fondamonte, I don't know if that's how you say it, but is leasing Arizona State Trust land that is unconstitutionally mandated to generate income for our public schools and universities from the state at only 1/6 the market rate. I have to ask why, is what he's saying. So these are the specific recommendations from our tribe to the state of Arizona for sustainability on water usage due to the extreme drought that we are facing right now. And I think that goes hand in hand with Colorado River water usage and also with the groundwater pumping that has occurred in Arizona. He's saying finally that the priorities of tribes must be protected as far as the CAP is concerned, and that he favors no cuts to tribes as we go forward. Thank you.
I'm really happy to see that the nation is finally inviting the tribes to the table to try to learn what we can from them. And it reminds me of Thomas Jefferson and what he learned from the indigenous peoples when he was trying to decide how to write the Constitution and how to try to develop this nation. This nation was a lot of the way that the United States formed its government comes from what he observed from what the peoples were already doing on these lands. And so I think about, the tribes weren't at the Constitutional Convention. Would America be different today if the tribes had participated from the very beginning in how we set this nation up? Tribes weren't at the table when they decided how to run the Colorado River. Would it be different today if tribes had actually been at that table and they've been able to give us, the non-Indians, the benefit of their knowledge? When we hear about the spirituality of water, what does that mean? Do you know what that means? Maybe someone should ask. Maybe someone should ask, what does that mean as far as what we do day to day with our water? There is no prayer today, which kind of struck me as being odd, because most meetings I go to, they're important that the tribe puts on, there's a prayer. And that prayer includes a prayer for the water every time, every single time. That's the reverence that the indigenous peoples have for the resources that this nation provides, that unfortunately, a lot of the non-indigenous people don't have. We don't have to point very far to see companies and people who are putting money ahead of protecting water, who are water quality, water quantity. And so I don't really need to go into it a lot because I don't really know what to teach about it. I try to learn what I can learn from the tribe. I was one of Wilkinson's students, and he taught me to listen. He taught me to try to learn. I don't go out there and tell the tribe what to do. I ask them, what do they want? And then I try to help them do what it is that they want to do. And that's the way that I learn too. And I've got a lot to learn. I learn something almost every day, and I've been there for 23 years. So we're just now embarking on this with the tribes. So I'd say let's learn what's happening. Let's learn the value of cultural resources and how that impacts the projects that we're doing. One of the projects that the two tribes are involved with, the Animas La Plata project, there's burials underneath that reservoir that are important. They're really significant. And yet, what do we talk about with that water? We talk about recreation. We talk about how we're going to bring people to it. We don't bring people to it out of respect for it. They go to it because they want to enjoy it and they want to use it. That's fine. That makes sense. I understand that. But do they know really what they're involving themselves with? I don't think they do. And so these are the questions we need to be asking. There's so much out there that we just don't ask. We don't ask why we need to know these things. What's important? What do we do day to day to respect the spirituality of water? What does that mean? Those are the questions we need to ask, and that's what we need to learn. You want to know what sustainability looks like? It probably wasn't perfect, but I'd say look back to 1491. That was sustainable. Thank you.
Forgive me, but I'm going to go ahead and sit down while I do this because I'm a bit clumsy and I don't think I can handle my iPad and a microphone at the same time. So my reservation, again, is in the state of Colorado next to my sister tribe, the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, and both of our reservations were created and established in 1868. So our water rights go back to 1868. We have senior priority federal water rights. But my reservation is a little bit different than the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. My reservation was opened up to settlement. So we have checkerboard land status. So we have a number of different land status within my reservation. My reservation is 15 miles wide, 75 miles long. So a lot different than what 56 million acres used to look like. And the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, they have continuous piece of land. So their land status is a little bit different. Their water situation is a lot different than mine as well too. I have 7 rivers that flow throughout my reservation, and most of our water rights come from the surface water from those different rivers. But we also have 3 reservoirs that we get our water from. We have the Basin Reservoir, which we get a lot of our irrigation and our potable water from. We also have the Lemon Dam, which we get irrigation water from. And we also have Lake Nighthorse. That's the Animas La Prada project. And this, we both have the same amount of water in this reservoir, but neither one of us can access that reservoir. So we have water there that we can't use. We can drive by and look at it. I guess we can pay to play in it like everybody else, but we can't use that water. This is a Bureau reclamation project, and once we take a drop of water out, we pay an O&M charges for that, and it's about $600,000 a year. And so the water that we have, our rights that are in this reservoir are for municipal and industrial uses only. We don't have an irrigation component that was taken out in part of the settlement. And so the irrigation component is really what we needed it, because that reservoir sits on my driest side of my reservation. And so whatever project we decide that we're going to develop to use that water has got to be financially stable so that it pays for the water that we take out of it. So we also have a water treatment plant on my reservation, which we're actually really proud of our water treatment plant. We have less than 500 tribal households that we serve. And the rest of my tribal members, we have about 1,500 tribal members, and most of those have to get their water, they haul their water to their homes. But yet we service the town of Ignacio potable water and about 1,000 non-tribal homes from our water treatment facility. In April 15, 2022, so a little over a year ago, the EPA approved our water quality standards. And so we're really proud again about the quality of water that comes out of our facility. And it's intended to protect the public health and welfare, also enhancing our water quality, and it's to serve the purpose of the Clean Water Act. And so again, that our water, we feel, is very clean. But also in regards to what is happening within the Colorado River Basin, we really want tribes to be part of the negotiations and the discussions and the development of the post-2026 operational guidelines. We want this to be institutionalized as well too, because we know that having a formal process is really what is needed. It didn't happen in 1922 or before that. And so now we know that really needs to be in writing as we go forward in figuring out solutions of what's going on in our river basin. We also, we're going to actively continue to protect our water rights and to develop our water rights. Again, everybody else that has water rights has had the opportunity to develop their water. They have the capacity to. For my tribe, the Southern Ute tribe, we fully intend to put our water to use. Within my area, we also have 175 miles of ditches this ditch system. It's a BIA ditch system, so it's a federal project. The federal government has failed to fulfill their trust responsibility in fixing this, so they haven't maintained this system since the 1960s. And so out of 175 miles of ditches, only 25% of this works. And so we're not able to put our water to use. We're not able to use the water that was intended to grow crops, and because they made us into ranchers and farmers when we were put on reservations, and we can't do that in some areas. And so putting our water to work is going to be really important. But again, I do want to say that there's been some good things that have happened within the basin, and we want to continue that trend as we go forward, because we know like the upper basin states have done a lot of good things for the tribes in the upper basin. They also took the lead in memorializing the tribe's participation in the JOA documents. And so we, again, want to thank them for that, because that's including us in those types of activities has been, we've been wanting that for a long time, and they're finally happening. And so we want that to continue to go forward as we move into hopefully the next 100 years, and we're saving the river. We know that this river is alive, and we know that it's going to sustain not just us, but for our future generations, because they're counting on us again to make those decisions that's going to affect them. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I'm the governor of the Gila River Indian community. And, you know, we were a part of the largest water settlement in U.S. history. In 2004, the Arizona Water Settlement Act. My late father, Rod Lewis, he was, and it's fitting we're here in law school, he was the first Arizona Native tribal member to be state certified bard in the state of Arizona, to argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. Had to do with our farms, because we were historically, traditionally farmers and agriculturalists, and it was before our other enterprises, our farms. It had to do with one of the first taxation cases back in I believe 1982, and it was Central Machinery versus the Arizona State Tax Commission. And he was the first Native American attorney to argue that case and to prevail. And he worked with, you know, you know, when I see also NARF is located here, he worked with the Native American Rights Fund on that Supreme Court case. So I see some representatives here. I was proudly, my father was on the board of NARF. My uncle John Lewis, who was the head of Intertribal Council, was the executive director, was on the NARF board, and I was on the NARF board. So I think there's something that says NARF that you have to have a Lewis on the NARF board. But then my brother, who is further on the panel, Chairman Robert McGill, is currently on the NARF board, and he's an honorary Lewis anyway. So but you know, the you know, fighting for, and my father, he dedicated his whole entire legal career to fighting for our water, our shuduk, as Chairman McGill said, you know, and he did it. And it was an amazing feat. Both him and our past tribal leaders came together. But now myself as governor, it's about actually implementing our water settlement. And that is a whole new struggle fraught with a lot of you know, of obstacles that we're looking at, that I have been looking at since I've been, this is my third term as governor. And so when we look at an approach of how we as tribes get a seat at the table, I can give you some recommendations here. And I have one major recommendation that I want to articulate in front of all you right now, that, you know, that as I hear my fellow very articulate tribal leaders talking about the policy, talking about the law, talking about our culture and tradition and our spirituality. This is, you know, all of you participants, you're getting a master class in water, in Indian water here, and I'm proud to be a part of that. So what I want to start to kick off is that the Gila River Indian community, you know, I think in a lot of ways, we epitomize the evolving role of tribes in the basin. And before 2016, we were not engaged in the basin-wide discussions. Now, occasionally, you know, we would attend CRUA, usually because it was a convenient place for us to meet with our reclamation officials, where we could discuss, you know, with our trustee, the latest issues impacting the implementation of our water settlement. Believe me, there were many issues, but Colorado River management was not one of those. Not until not until 2016. And that's when we learned about the Lower Basin DCP. That was the year we learned that the Lower Basin states had developed a proposal with our trustees, meaning the federal government, our trustees' encouragement, without our input at all, with no seat at the table, but nonetheless, that would cut considerable amounts of our CAP water. And our CAP water is expressly identified as a federally protected trust resource in our congressionally approved water settlement. That's federal law, right? So we view the Lower Basin DCP as a proposed regulatory taking of our water, our SHUDUG. But our trustee couldn't be bothered at the time with consulting with us, as the plan was being discussed among the Lower Basin states. So as a result of this initial first misstep, we made it clear to the United States that going forward, they would never leave us out of the loop again. When others were discussing actions that would negatively impact our water supplies, you know, to their credit, especially those at Reclamation, they have made sure that we're in the loop. We've held them accountable. Now, in the end, we decided to work with Reclamation, with ADWR, Tom Bushotsky, who's here today, CAP, City of Phoenix, and others to find a way to implement the Lower Basin DCP in Arizona. Now, there were other tribes involved in this process, like our sister tribe, the Tohono Nation, Colorado River Indian tribes. But at that time, the community was truly unique. Not only did we have a large volume of water that we could contribute to conservation, we were also the only tribe facing actual cuts to our supplies under DCP. That would be a second taking of our water in violation of federal law. So other tribes either had fully firm rights or senior rights that were not threatened by the Lower DCP at the time. So the community, the leadership, and now myself, who was our leader, governor, we had to get involved. We had to be at the table in Arizona. And I'm proud to say that we were good partners and we developed those relationships within Arizona that has only grown stronger as we dealt, again, with poor hydrology beginning in, as we know, in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And although there has been a temporary reprieve this year, we recognize in regards to the hydrology, we recognize that overuse of the Colorado River will still need to be addressed nonetheless. And in the near term, that means finalizing, of course, the SEIS, but in the long term, that means developing a new post-2026 plan, respecting tribes. Now, under both of these processes, the community is no longer unique in one sense. There are now many other basin tribes that face the risk of significant and deep cuts. Now, all basin tribes, and I'll reiterate this again, all basin tribes need to be at the table. But what does this table look like? And when should it be established? Well, again, I'm going to give my impression, my recommendation as to how this looks like. First, the table should include representatives from all 38 sovereign governments in the United States portion of the basin. So that's, of course, the United States, the 7 basin states, and the 30 basin tribes. Now, some basin tribes may not want to participate for whatever reason, but nonetheless, they should have a seat if they want one. And I strongly believe that this group of 38 sovereigns should meet whenever the United States feels it has to meet with all of the principles of the 7 basin states. Now, as we develop a post-2026 plan, it's no longer acceptable for the United States to meet with 7 basin states separately and then come to basin tribes after the fact with a post hoc explanation or rationalization of what was discussed, or even worse, what was decided. But to be clear, these meetings among all the basin sovereigns would not replace individual government-to-government consultation between basin tribes and the United States, nor would it replace the important dialogue among basin states and tribes, or basin states in the United States, or any other subgroup meeting. only when the United States decides to meet with all Basin States principals would the requirement to include all tribes at that same time be triggered. This new inclusion plan should be done as soon as possible so it can be used as we start the post-2026 process. And I strongly believe that this group needs to be established and the process in place before the end of the post-2026 scoping comment period deadline. Now, it's come to my attention, and probably some of you as well, that Reclamation plans to issue its post-2026 notice of intent as early as next week. And we've asked Reclamation in our consultation to make sure that the scoping comment period is long enough to establish this process before the end of the scoping period. But I'm concerned that this period is not going to be long enough. But at any rate, I think what I'm proposing is fair, and it wouldn't interfere with the important sidebar meetings that need to take place as we all try to figure out a consensus-based plan on the long-term operations of the Colorado River system. Again, I look forward to working with Reclamation, the states, and my fellow tribal leaders, sovereign tribal nations, as we start to discuss to put this process in place. Thank you.
Thank you all. I think it's pretty clear that I am not a tribal leader, but merely a tribal representative, and I am honored and really respect the fact that the chairwoman at the Kaibab Band of Paiute Indians in Arizona asked me to come today and give a short talk and explanation of the tribe's interest with respect to the Colorado River. And the chairwoman, by the way, sends her regrets that she was unable to be here. I think folks have heard today that tribes have many obligations. I think Daryl mentioned it earlier, that and our tribal leadership in particular wear many hats, 10, 20, 30 different hats, and it's very difficult to get away to attend important conferences like this. And so it's good to have emissaries that can be sent out to convey the tribe's feelings and position with respect to these issues. First, I want to say to Shenandoah that Kaibab is very aware of Shivwits. They are related, and they share the same strong connection to the Colorado River. Shivwits is just up the road from Kaibab, and I believe Shivwits was from the same area where Kaibab has remained. Kaibab was not removed from its traditional territory, which is, as I mentioned earlier, all the way north in Arizona up against the Utah border. And so what that represents for the tribe is a really interesting interplay between the states. It's a tribe located in Arizona, but it is more connected to Utah because of where it's located, very close to the Utah border, very close to the urban centers in Utah, which the tribe does most of its business with. It's difficult to go to Phoenix. It's a long way away, but excuse me, St. George, Utah is only an hour away. And so the connections with Utah are strong. And I think it represents the difficulty that comes when we look at the dividing lines of state boundaries and how that affects tribal interests. As everyone here knows, the tribal territory, traditional tribal territory, did not pay attention to artificial state boundaries. And in fact, Kaibab's territory went very far north, all the way up into the mountains there by, north of Kanab and into Grand Staircase Escalante, and then all the way down to the north rim of the Grand Canyon. And the territory now, when we look at it, is indeed defined by state boundaries. And so when we look at what the tribe needs, what the tribe can do with respect to its interests with the Colorado River, it's dependent on the state of Arizona, even though the tribe is very connected to the state of Utah. And it was John Thompson, who used to be the manager of the Washington County Water Conservancy District in St. George, that used to say, gosh, if our state boundary just went all the way down to the rim of the Colorado River, we wouldn't have a problem in trying to work with the tribe to provide the tribe with some water from our very large project, which everyone here knows is the Lake Powell Pipeline, which is a very big pipeline that will run when it comes time to construct it, if it comes time to construct it, from Lake Powell all the way over to the community of St. George. And it will cut through the Kaibab tribe's reservation and traditional territory. And so this is a very important concept, I think, that we need to keep in mind as we go forward in working to develop a new management regime, a new management system for the waters of the Colorado River that don't limit what states can do with respect to water if they need to help a tribe that happens to lie outside the boundaries of the state. And I say that because when we think about a project like the Lake Powell Pipeline, it's going to come through the tribe's reservation when it's built. Can the tribe get water from that pipeline under the current law of the river, under the current 1922 compact? That's a question that's very much up in the air because it is Utah moving Utah water. The tribe is located in Arizona. The tribe is going to see this pipeline come up to its front door. Can it get water out of that pipeline? It's a very, very good question. And so as we work together here, as we all form our Basin Tribal Coalition here and continue to insist on a seat at the table, the tribes must have a seat at the table. They must be equal negotiators as we come up with this new management and operation regime. We need to think about what it means for a tribe to house these projects that serve vital state interests, but can the tribes benefit from them? And that is something I want to make very clear, that we need to be more flexible in how we come up with that new regime, in how we can serve tribes as part of these projects, which we all know in recent history need to have more than one beneficiary. The federal government has been very clear that projects need to serve more than one interest. And I think this is something we can keep on the front burner as we have these conversations, as we go forward with the tribes at the table, with the 38 seats at the negotiating table that Governor Lewis mentioned. Thank you very much.
So I thought I'd give myself a challenge today and go back to my PhD at the University of Utah and do a flash talk. So 4 minutes, it's about 2:19, and to cover 4 topics to be able to describe to you. The first topic being the need for availability of surface water and access and development of that surface water for the benefit of Navajo communities, so San Juan River water as well as Colorado River water. The second, being able to describe the intersection between Colorado River water along with food and energy. I think it's important that when we talk about water, we also talk about the food and energy nexus as well. The third topic being the increased communication with states as well as the federal government. And lastly, being able to describe the formalization of participation of tribes. So first, why does Navajo Nation need surface water instead of just relying on groundwater? Navajo Nation has over 521 abandoned uranium mines within the boundaries of the Navajo Nation. We have significant uranium and arsenic issues. Not only that, we have total dissolved solids upwards of, definitely higher than the maximum contaminant level. We have some areas 10,000 milligrams per liter in the southwestern portion of the Navajo Nation. We have significant challenges associated with water production as well. Every one of you may not be aware, but it's not a perfectly layered cake under the Navajo Nation or under the Colorado Plateau, so it's important to have that understanding. Some of our municipal wells or domestic wells that contribute to the public water system for Navajo Tribal Utility Authority only run at 8 gallons per minute. And you have these large communities, and I don't have to be, someone to tell you that, well, why would you develop that type of water? I mean, when you do these type of analyses, you try to develop these wells in places that you think are the best places to put them. But unfortunately, they are not the best place to put them. So projects like the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project, having the opportunity to provide 300 miles of pipeline, serving 43 Navajo communities the opportunity to be able to secure and sustain their water future with San Juan River water is the best opportunity. And 8 of those Navajo communities are now receiving San Juan River water off of the Cutter Lateral on the far eastern side of the Navajo Nation. In addition to that, now proceeding into describing the need for understanding of the food and energy nexus. So yes, we have 110 Navajo communities. All are not along the San Juan River or along the Colorado River, although a significant number of them are. I mean, I don't know how many of you have gone from Farmington and gone on San Juan River, maybe taken out at Clay Hills, but a good majority of that is Navajo Nation. And even from Lee's Ferry down to the confluence of the Colorado River to the Little Colorado River, 3 days on that river trip, on the left side, as you go downstream, is Navajo Nation. And being able to see that, there's an important understanding of needing to know Navajo Nation, it's no secret, it's a food desert. 13 grocery stores for a place similar in size to Ireland or the state of West Virginia. And so we farm in various different ways. We do dry land farming. We do, at my house right now, we do drip irrigation. There's center pivots. There's still flood irrigation that occurs off of the hogback and the fruitland canals. There's ways of improving those methods of growing food in those areas. But the other thing to understand as well, when we think about the energy nexus, thinking about WAPA, thinking about hydropower, and thinking about those WAPA customers, a good chunk of them are members of the tribes that are represented here today and from the Navajo Nation communities as well. And so when you think about the need for electricity, I mean, how else can you move that water without having the electricity to be able to move them over the vast land area, which is the most of the West? And so now describing into the increased communications with the states as well as the federal government, we are definitely appreciative of that. The last few years, I've been busier. That's great news for our tribe, though, it's being more communication with the Upper Colorado River Commission, having the opportunity to have the Upper Colorado River Commission from Wyoming, from Colorado, from Utah and New Mexico, as well as the newly federal chair, be able to come to the Navajo Nation, to be able to see some of the impacts on the Navajo Nation. Before all of the snowmelt runoff, I mean, what we were seeing was what formerly went down to Antelope Point Marina was seeing what you used to walk down to the lake, high above, not more than 10 feet for sure, maybe almost 50 feet above where you could be standing from the bottom. And so just having an understanding of not only the economic impacts, but also the energy impacts that can be on those customers, regardless of where they may be adjacent or not adjacent to the river, is really important understanding. But having communication with our partners at the state as well as the federal government. I can recall over 3 years ago when we were informed about emergency releases from Navajo Reservoir being proposed and being told it's going to happen in 2 days. And you're like, what? Like, no one even told us about this. And now that we have, more increased communication, having at, the level that we are at now, monthly communication regarding Navajo Reservoir with the Bureau of Reclamation. We have these Colorado Tribal Information Exchange meetings. So even if something is going to happen on the horizon fairly soon, or maybe was released the day of, be able to have the opportunity to have an understanding. But now proceeding on into the framework. Sorry, went a little over. My advisor would probably be very sad. But just the formalization of participation of tribes in the process. A good example, section 7.2 in the Drought Response Operations Agreement. There's opportunity for tribes to participate in the working groups, and you're notified before the fact, before the decision is made. And so as the commissioner alluded to today, we are supportive of having formalized participation, because what we know is that having formalized participation, a part of the framework, can weather the test of time, but more importantly, be able to weather the test of change in administration, because we know from the 2007 interim guidelines that lasted for 19 years, and that's multiple changes in administration. And so by doing so, formalizing this process, there's a greater opportunity for tribes' participation before decisions are made.
Once again, Jordan Joaquin, president of the Quechan tribe, located in Yuma. And so the signing of the 1922 Colorado River, they were doing a slideshow in Utah, and everyone was celebrating. Tribal leaders who were there, we weren't really celebrating because we weren't at the table. We weren't even US citizens at the time. But now we are, and so a little history as well. A couple of months ago, I was fortunate to attend the Secretary Holland and naming the Avi Kwame National Monument. That's where my people come from. So my entire council went up, and it felt like we were home. That's where our ancestors came from. That's where our creation songs came from. And our creation songs include water. So it was good to be back home where we were created. Water is a part of us. We need a living river. So being a river tribe, very downriver, if you will, it's meaningful to us. So we could speak for hours on the broken trust responsibilities of this government, broken treaties. Every tribal leader here acknowledges that. We don't forget. Hopefully you guys don't either. But where do we go from here? And like Governor Lewis says, it's about partnerships. It's about getting along with your governors, your state legislatives, representatives, NGOs. It's about us, me, Quechan, having a partnership with Imperial Irrigation District. It's about partnership with, for us, MWD. And I do have to give a shout out to Mina, who's been there by my side, consulting me. But as you guys all know, Mina here, as I walk through the hallways, it's like I'm her bodyguard. Everyone knows her. But it's about true partnerships. Our partnership with the small Bard Valley Water District, who used to do our measurements for us. Now we have a water technician, 2 of them now. True numbers. Where do we go from here? And thank you, Governor Lewis, for making that recommendation. And it was said earlier, tribes should be at the table. I pledge to tribal leaders and everyone here today, we will be at the table for post-2026. It's meaningful to us. It's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do. It's about partnerships, conservation. You know, we have to start thinking forward, progress. The Quechan motto on our seal is "Together we progress," and that is so meaningful throughout the years. Together we progress. Our tribal members thought it was just us together, but it's together with our communities that we live in. The partnerships of the city of Yuma. Last year, around this time, we had a microburst go through our reservation. 195 power poles were knocked out. And although we live in Imperial County, they reached out to us, but Mayor Nichols in Yuma called me every day and said, "What do you need?" We have the Ocean Bridge that we have pictures of years ago. It was like an ocean. Steamboats used to travel up. Now it's just a trickle. Partnerships with city of Yuma. Restoration of our area, of our land. The Sunrise Park. years ago was dried up trees along the river. We restored that area. Now it's just as vibrant. As I look out around here on this beautiful campus, I see the vibrant green. That is now happening on our reservation because we decided to conserve, plant some more trees. We need to reach out. Audubon has always been with us as well with proposals. It's where do we go from here? Where do we progress from here? We can't live in the past. All tribal leaders remember the past. It's in our DNA, what has happened to us. But where do we go from here? I'm pleased, I'm honored to be here as I sit here among tribal leaders. There's over 573 recognized federal tribes in the United States. And look who you have here. A small but powerful group of tribal leaders. So where does we go from here? Partnerships. I always say this to when we go to DC, when I go, and my council goes to visit our representatives. When we go and I extend my hand out to our governors, our senators, I don't extend my hand out for a handshake or for a handout, because we as tribes don't ask for handouts. We're just extending our hand to reaffirm the trust responsibilities that this U.S. government owes us. Reaffirm. Where do we go from here? Partnerships, solutions. Governor Lewis gave a recommendation. Thank you for that. We're at the table. Now let's come up with some solutions. It's educating everyone here who may not know every tribe has its own different priorities. But we're survivors of the land. We're still here. We are still here. And I just want to thank you guys again for this panel. There should be every topic of water, cultural sites, environmental. There should always be a tribal leaders panel because you will learn. Thank you. And before I close, I don't know if you guys ever been to Gila River's casinos. I want to become an honorary brother as well because if you guys haven't been to the Wild Horse, man, I'm just, but anyhow, you gotta tell me you gotta tell me the example.
That's right.
Perfect timing. I was gonna sit down and speak, but the feeling finally came back into my legs so I can stand up. I was falling asleep. So again, Robert McGill, chairman of the Auction Indian Community, 40 miles south of Phoenix, Arizona. And forgive me if I walk around, I like to speak and walk. I might seem like I'm a pastor, but I'm not. So, but Auction, I'll tell you what, it's, you know, I was fortunate enough to be raised by my grandfather and my grandparents overall. My mom and dad weren't there for me when I was much younger. So my grandfather was able to raise me, and he taught me a lot of things in life, obviously. And water was one of the first things he'd ever taught me about, and how important it was to tribes overall and to our community. He was one of the last farmers in Auction, true farmers. And I'll tell you what, helping him plant crops and harvest was just something special to see, especially in his eyes. You could see his eyes welting up and seeing as everything progressed. And so I learned at an early age how important water was for our community. And again, he was chairman back in the 70s. And today I am the chairman of the community of Auction. And I thank him so much for giving me direction and opening up my eyes to beautiful things that tribes see as valuable resources. Back in the 70s, him and other tribal leaders were able to make their way to DC to lobby their efforts for water settlement, water rights. And actually we have the the first congressional water settlement ever established and given to a tribe. And this is coming from Little Auction, 22,000 acre tribe, 16,000 designated agriculture. And today we have a little bit over 1,100 members, one of the smaller tribes, but the great tribe. So, but again, to see all of that and to see everything progresses, the decades have gone on has been wonderful. And again, just reaffirms how important water is to us. And again, as commented and as you've heard testimony, again, the importance of what it means to us as tribes is really crucial. It's all we've ever had. It's all we've ever asked for. Growing up, again, I had asked my grandfather, why is water, this trickle of water going through so meaningful or so precious? And as he explained and how I grew up in, as generations went by, decades went by, I know how much it gave to us in a number of ways, whether it was for our crops, whether it was to our homes, our enterprises overall. It just meant so much. And we wouldn't be here today without our water settlement. And I always thank every day our former tribal leaders and those members of our community who are no longer with us that have inspired us and motivated us to continue to fight for our water, to make sure that we secure our water, because it's not only going to help us today, but our future generations. And one of the things that I do still think of today more than anything is what we're doing here today, advocating, educating, and the need for a water settlement. My grandfather was doing it back in the 70s, and we're still doing it today. It's like we haven't made any progression. And again, it's because we've never had tribes at the table before. Now's the time. I've got 7 kids. Oh my God, 7 kids, 5 girls and 2 boys, ranges 13 to 30. And each one of them asked, Dad, if I get into leadership, am I going to be having to fight for what our great grandfather did in the 70s, something I'm doing today? And unfortunately, I couldn't give him the answer I wanted to give him. That was no. We're going to be working together. Everything's going to be great. But again, right now, today, they see we're doing it. So it's like, that's something they need to prepare for themselves. So again, the testimony, the comments, have us at the table. That's all we ask. Would we be in this problem today if we did have tribes back in the day? I don't know, but I think it would be a lot better than what it is today. I can't, I'm going to be blunt forward. I have to be, because it seems like nothing's come across all these, and I'm not saying my comment's going to make everything move forward. It's not. But I'll tell you this much, and speaking to other tribes, tribal leaders, not just in Arizona, but throughout the United States, and even community members when it's dealing with water. Unfortunately, history has shown that Natives have always gotten the short end of the stick, or we were forgotten. So these comments that are here today, they knew about this water drought decades ago. They knew there was a problem. They knew this was going to happen. Why didn't they do anything then? Why did they start the process then? And unfortunately, guys, we can't help but think it's going to go back to way back in the day. Let's take it from the tribes. Let's take it from the Indians like we've done before. And that's where it's come to. And I have to be blunt forward with that, because that's the way we're thinking now, is that they're going to take from us like they did before. So, and again, we don't like to think that way. We like to think of everybody as good people wanting to work together to solve our solutions, to mitigate, to help one another, because that's what we do as tribes. Even though we've seen it and history has shown that that's happened against us, we still want to work with you. We still want to do great things with you. So, again, listening to my fellow, friends and family here up on stage, leaders, it's great. It's always a great honor. And we always know as we sit together as leaders, together, unity as one makes a big difference, not one voice. And so when there's consultations, when there's meetings with a tribe or 2 or 3, It doesn't mean you're meeting with all the tribes. You're not consulting with everybody. As mentioned, everybody has a different water settlement. So please come and get to know what we're about. And we would, again, be willing to work with you. You know, tribes, as you know, natives, it's in our DNA to help, regardless of, even if we had $1, we're gonna give you $1. But again, as it goes on, we need to start trusting in you, but that trust starts with you being with us and seeing what we've come through, what we've gone through, and help us to understand that you're willing to work with us. Now, the government, again, this administration, and you know, we've seen improvements, which is great. I mean, we've seen that. We now have that comfort possibly to say, it's gonna work. It's gonna be okay. And that's all we want, is that opportunity to work together. It's beautiful. Tribes are beautiful, I tell you, overall. So please, again, I appreciate the time. And you know, again, I look forward to continuing in our relationship with the water districts, government, what have you when it comes to water. Just understand we are key players too. We are stakeholders, and we can help. But again, you need to give us trust. We need to trust you. And so please be a part of us. In my 10 years in leadership, that's one of the things I echo more than anything when I meet with our congressional leaders, whether it's the state of Arizona or throughout the country. You know what? It's great, fine and dandy that we're sitting here talking to you here, but come over here to our side, because it's much more meaningful to see you at our place. It gives us trust. Our members, especially the older ones, don't really trust the government too much because they've never come to see us. So if you want that trust, if you want to work together, come out to see us. And on behalf of my tribe, the Auction Indian community, remember something. We all win with Auction.
Thank you. You know, it's, my foot went to sleep also. It is, it's really an honor to be a part of this very experienced group of tribal leaders. This is my first venture into tribal politics, and well, it's been interesting, I guess as the tribal leaders would say. And Daryl, I'll try to keep it under 4 minutes. I want to give you a little bit of information because it has some bearing on what the 3 points I want to make. Our water was, our allocation was established as 1865. We have about 113 miles of river that runs right through the middle of our reservation, river shore. We have about 113 miles of that. So we're on both the California and Arizona side. We have also over 700,000 acre feet of water allocated to us in priority 1 each year. We have about 285 miles of canals, 133 miles of drains. And, you know, the trouble is we only have about a 52% efficiency. So the half of the water we take from the river is not really going to the plants at the farms itself. So we have to work on that. That's where the conservation is going to be of a big help to us. You know, with the climate change and the drought that is predicted here, we all need to get together and do something. We want to work together. Our tribe, the Colorado River Indian tribes, really want to save the river, not just for the human beings and the cities and so forth, but also for the habitat, for the animals and so forth that live along our river, because we're familiar with that. And the first thing I want to mention, though, is something that's been mentioned several times here already, is that we really want a place at the table. We have a lot of water allocated to us, and we would like to be able to have a say into where that water is going to be going. We have high priority water, and we would like to be a part of any state proposal or basin proposal, whatever might come out of it, because our cultural tie to the river is baked in. Whether we're Christianized or whatever it might be, we are still proud culturally Navajo, Hopi, Chemehuevi, and Mojave tribes there. And we all subscribe to that. What we want to do is to save the river, and that's to benefit all of us. We have to protect the river. We return a lot of water back to the river, and we don't get any credit for that. So one of the things we're going to do is try to stop returning so much water back to the river. Use that water to develop new grounds, or perhaps use that water to help other irrigation districts. We can do that. Okay, the third thing is really has to do with the conservation. That's what I really wanted to mention here. We are looking at three different areas in which we can conserve water. First of all, the farms itself. So we are farmers. We are farmers, and we want to be farmers. We want to produce food, because as one of the people mentioned here, food should be an important ingredient here when we're talking about conserving water, the farmers. Our farm, we're doing a lot to conserve water on our farms. Flood irrigation is very highly inefficient. We're trying to develop new systems of irrigating. We're putting in cement ditches where we had dirt ditches. We're having better crops, which don't require so much water. So we're doing a lot to help along the area of developing our farms and conserving water there. But what we don't have any control of is our irrigation system. The infrastructure that is run by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And we would like to make some investments. We know where we could save water, where we could save a lot of water, like 200,000 acre feet of water per year if we would make these changes. But we don't have any control over that. And we are a little reluctant to put money into a system that we don't own. And we would like to see a little more cooperation between BOR and the BIA in repairing those ditches. The last major change in our irrigation infrastructure was made in 1942 when the United States government built some canals for the Japanese who were interned on our reservation, the three huge camps there. I guess I could go on. Besides the farm and the irrigation system, we would like to recycle a lot of our drain water. We dump a lot of our drain water back in the river. We have a lot of seepage that we could be using. We'd like to recycle that. It's brackish water that could be used to develop more farmland. We have some rich farmland that is not developed yet. We'd like to develop that. With the coming food crisis, that could be a big help to the rest of the communities. We want to be a part of the solution. We want to be able to cooperate. We worked for several years. We worked for several years to get some legislation passed in which we could participate in the sharing of our water with the municipalities, with other irrigation districts, with other tribes that are not as fortunate as we are to have so much water. We would like to do that. We had our legislation passed. It went through the House of Representatives with an overwhelming majority, unanimous support in the United States Senate. But when it comes to signing a final agreement with the state of Arizona, that's yet to be determined. That's the only thing that's holding us up from helping other entities, other irrigation districts, cities, other tribes. We want to be a part of the solution. That could be a big step forward. Thanks.
I'd like to thank all these tribal leaders up here for their comments, their concerns, and their opinions. Sounds like some of them got some good productivity going on the reservations, and that's good to hear. We all have our unique relationships with the states that we reside in. We all have a unique relationship with the federal government. And for the Ute Indian tribe, that's where the relationship is at. We have a relationship with the federal government, and the state of Utah and the tribe, the relationship there when it comes to water, among other things, hasn't been good at all. There has been a little bit of sunlight, a little bit of light here lately, but for the most part, the relationship with the state of Utah and the Ute Indian tribe has not been very, very good at all. There's a constant attack on our sovereignty there on the reservation. Into numerous 10 district court of appeals here in Denver, Colorado, with the local counties and the state of Utah over jurisdiction, and for many years, when it couldn't get their foot in the door through that, they try to do it legislatively. Some public land initiative things that happened, and we had to fight that off too. So the relationship there with the state of Utah, that's one thing that that's probably one of the biggest obstacles for the Ute Indian tribe. We have the largest apportionment of water in the state of Utah. The state has allocated, in my opinion, and there may be some people in here representing Utah's interest, but in my opinion, the state of Utah has allocated all the water there is to be allocated by the state of Utah. The only water left is the Ute Indian tribe's water. And it has been being used for a long period of time now, and it hasn't been paid for. The Wasatch Valley, they benefit from the upper basin, but yet they're not a part of that upper basin, but they benefit from the upper basin's water. Miss Lorelei talked about how the band of Uncompahgre people, the Ute people, were here in Colorado along with the White Rivers, but they were removed. They were removed here and located in Utah, and Utah Valley Ute people, they were relocated to the Uinta Mountains, and that's where we come to be at now. That's how we've become to be there. That Utah Valley was full of water at one time, full of water. The Mormon people came in, settlers, moved the Ute people out of there, out of the valley, chased them all out, and then started, building, and more people came. Then pretty soon, there was no more water in that valley, no more water. So they came to the tribe, and they made a deal in 1965, which was called the 65 Deferral Agreement. And in that agreement, there was 3 entities: the Ute Indian tribe, the state of Utah, and the federal government. And there was a quantification done by L.E. Decker, the quantification of the tribe's water within the Uinta-Ouray Ute Indian Reservation. And everybody agreed to that quantification of water. Everybody agreed to it. So in exchange of taking irrigatable water for all these lands on the northern part of the reservation, they built a dam called the Upper and Lower Stillwater Dams. And they drilled a tunnel as big as this room. Big as this room, a tunnel. They drilled it right through the mountains on the reservation. They came, BOR, they drilled this hole all the way through, diverted all that water out towards, out to the Wasatch Valley, Strawberry, Jordanelle Lake. I went by there yesterday. I got off the plane. I was in Minnesota, NCAI. Got off the plane, drove home. Jordanelle Lake, almost completely full now again. Almost completely full now. That's tribal water in that lake. You go to Strawberry, almost completely full again, tribal water. Go to Starvation, almost all the tribal water. The tribe made an agreement to send their water to the Wasatch Front for the benefit of that community so they could have water. In agreement, the tribe was going to get their water back out of the Flaming Gorge and the Green River. That was the agreement agreed upon by the 3 entities in 65. Since 1965, our apportionment, which is 500,000 acre-feet of water, has been flowing down that river, and someone's been using it. The tribe hasn't got a penny for it. And when the tribe has moved in a direction to use that water, the very people that are there to help us benefit from those allocations of water that are Federal Reserve water right to the Ute Indian tribe, the very entities that are there to help us with this water to our benefit, roadblocks. The DOI, BOR, all those people that are under BIA, putting up roadblocks. But when the non-Indians want to use water or develop something within our reservation or with tribal water, the BOR, the BIA is right there to help them. This pipeline, the lady spoke about coming from St. George, from the river. They call on a 1922 priority date. The Ute Indian tribe has an 1861 priority date. The tributaries that come off our mountains, our reservation, flow into the Colorado River. And there's a large apportionment of what goes in there. But yet, we're still sitting here in litigation, consultation, consultated to death. You know, and it's good, the relatives here say to get to the table. But when we sit at that table, I want to be sitting with decision makers. We have decision makers here. We were elected to make decisions for our people. All of us. So why shouldn't we be sitting across the table from people that can make the decisions instead of being consulted constantly? That 500,000 acre feet of water, like I say, someone's using it since 1965. And then in the early 80s, the tribe and the state of Utah agreed to a code. Federal government set back, drugged their feet. Mid 80s, late 80s, they decided they didn't want to do it because it was going to cost them too much money to build a mechanism to get that water from the Green River to the reservation. That's not our fault. You guys agreed to it. They agreed to the quantification, and they agreed that they would never take it back to court or question it. And so, and for us to get anything done or even move, it has to go to litigation. We're always in litigation. And then while we're litigating, we'd sit down at a table to consult. There's certain things that we can't, they say, oh, well, we can't talk about that because we're in litigation. Well, why even waste our time and sit here and try to discuss something? You know, so that's just a little bit of what is going on. And, you know, that history, that part of it, knowing that and still dealing with that is something that, you know, being optimistic is hard. Knowing that those things still right there for us. And like I say, some of these tribes, some of my relatives here sound like they got some good productive things going on, and that's good. And I'm thankful that they're able to do those things for their people. It's good. And you know, this whole thing, us sitting here in this consultation, I was looking at some of this sovereign to sovereign, you know, federal, tribal, government to government consultation. I mean, by now, we should have already came up with something. All these years, you know, the federal government, 1922, they were there to say, we represent the tribal interest. But like some of the relatives here said, you know, we were nowhere around. They just did everything in the benefit of the non-Indian people. And that's how it's always been. That's the only way I've ever seen it. We're an afterthought. We're an afterthought. The Apache brother says, people are going to take a cut. We're going to have to take a cut so these other people can get what they need. What about us? We want our people to live too. You know, and the balance of everything, you know, the balance of everything, you know, how are we going to balance it? We live in a petroleum-based economy, right? A petroleum-based economy that creates jobs, creates production. You have to have energy. You're going to build more homes. You're going to have more energy. You know, where's all this going to come from? Where are you going to have the water? So the balance of it, you know, the one thing that could help everything is stop production, development, stop development. That's what it is. But is it going to happen? Probably not. So we're faced, all of us, tribal and non-tribal, we're all faced with something. We're all faced with this, and we're all going to have to take it on, either individually, tribes individual by themselves, or we're going to do it together. So I don't know what it's going to take. Myself, I don't know. I mean, it's just, you know, here we are talking about it again. Where is this conversation going to lead to? Are we going to be here 10 years later and some other leaders are going to be here talking to some of you same people? You know, I don't know. Yeah, and I'm just hopeful something, some kind of action, because consultation, let's have some action. You know, maybe there's not people in here in this room that make decisions at a level that's going to bring some production, but I'm sure there's people in here right now that got a juice card that can advocate for each and every one of us sitting up here talking to all of you people. Some of you in here have the ability and have the power to advocate for us tribes, individually in our states or as a group. And so I hope the ones that do have that ability, I hope you go back to wherever you guys are going to huddle up at after we're done here and speak on our behalf. Speak on our behalf. You're here listening. Help us take action. Tegoyak.
Wow, that was really powerful and very humble to hear all the messaging from the tribal leaders and tribal leader representatives. And I was told that it was going to probably be a challenge to try to keep them to 3 to 4 minutes. And there's some joke there about handing a microphone to a tribal leader. I don't know. And, but, you know, I think, you know, heard very loud and clearly about, you know, the differences, and then also the commonality in terms of what you heard from, well, what I heard anyway, about the spiritual significance of water and the value that's placed on that and the reverence that's placed on it by the tribes in the basin, and also the knowledge of, you know, the willingness to participate, and the knowledge of the willingness, you know, to be able to share with you, you know, those intimate things that go on in our reservations. And again, you know, the purpose being that, you know, hopefully, you know, it leads to, you know, a relationship building, and as Chris mentioned, in some places where maybe those relationships are not that great or non-existent. And so, you know, that's hard to make any progress without those relationships being in place. And I know I'm really sorry that we're not going to have time for questions. And so please, I know these folks would be more than happy to probably answer any questions from you when you see them in the hallway. So we're going to take a break now till 3:30 so we can get back on schedule. And let's give our tribal leadership some big hands.
All right, we are going to get going again. At least in theory. Before we get started with the Basin States panel, I should explain to you that as we've gone through the sovereigns today, where's Mexico? And Mexico was invited, and we were told that there's some very important negotiations happening today. I wasn't lied to, it's actually true. Okay. I'm never sure. Okay. And so they decided not to send somebody. And I said, okay, we can probably use the extra time. So Mexico is an important sovereign in this basin. They were invited. I'll get to that one next. Wyoming. Well, there was the group meted and decided to vote someone off the island. And so Wyoming is not here, is one story. The other story is Brandon Gebhardt who was confirmed, got called to testify to the legislature, I believe, today. Called to testify somewhere. I'm just going to assume it was the legislature. So he's not here today. So we have 6 states, which should make this conversation 1/7 easier than it otherwise would be. But we'll see. But whether it's easy or not is not my problem, because Luke Runyon is going to run this panel. When I first, yes, it's your problem. When I started doing this work, 30 years ago, there weren't a lot of interested media covering this basin. And those that were didn't know this basin very well. And jump forward 30 years, and there's some really good journalists in this basin doing some really good work. And Luke is certainly on that short list of really good journalists. And so we recruited him with this panel to, rather than hear each of the panelists give the talk that they've give every event they go to, probably, I thought we'd have Luke see if he couldn't get a conversation out of them. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to do that for about an hour, and then we're going to do questions. I know I promised there'd be questions on the last panel, and that was just naive of me. But we're going to try it again, and that's the plan. And Luke, it's all yours.
All right. I'm a little too tall for this mic, so I'll just project. Thanks so much, Doug, for the introduction. That was great. And thanks so much for having me, and good to see you all. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Luke Runyon. I work for KUNC, which is the NPR station for Northern Colorado, where I run a project that focuses on the Colorado River Basin with NPR stations all throughout the Southwest. I've been doing that since the fall of 2017. So I've been to many pockets of the Colorado River Basin, maybe not all of them, but quite a few of them in the course of covering the river for that time. I just recently finished the Ted Scripps Fellowship at the University of Colorado here in the Center for Environmental Journalism. I audited one of Sam Kalin's courses here at the law school, spent a bit of time at the law school, convinced me that I didn't actually want to be a lawyer, but it was fun to play one for a year in school. And just recently finished a podcast called Thirst Gap, all about the Colorado River's supply and demand imbalance. So if you've got a long plane ride or car ride after this conference and you haven't listened to it yet, I'd highly encourage you to do so. Quite a few of you in this room were featured in it, either by voice or by your work. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation because these last couple of weeks have been crazy in terms of like the amount of news that's been coming from the Colorado River Basin after several years of pretty intense negotiations on the river, decisions that are being made, and the effects of climate change that are showing themselves in the Colorado River Basin. So maybe to give you a sense of what I'm planning for this panel. So I wanted to give just a little bit of background from when we all gathered here last year. What was going on at that time felt very different, very somber and dire situation in the Colorado River Basin to where we are now. I wanted to get a little bit of behind the scenes from these folks of what the past year has been like for them. I wanted to talk a bit about the great imagining that we're going to have of the post-2026 guidelines for the river and hear from you all how you're thinking about those negotiations. And really the goal here is to have a candid discussion. So I hope that you can help me in achieving that goal and being as candid as possible. And I'm glad that the projection screen went up so that we can have that. And really, I would love for some of this to turn into a discussion amongst yourselves. This doesn't just have to be me peppering you with questions. If you hear something among the panelists that you would like to respond to, be my guest. So maybe just to start, we'll go down the line. I'll introduce our panelists. And I'd like for you to just say maybe what was the hardest or most challenging aspect of the past year for you from your perspective on the river. So we'll start with Becky Mitchell. She is the director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board and Colorado's commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission. So Becky.
All right, is this thing on? I think in terms of over the last year, what has been most difficult for me is feeling a sense of urgency and feeling the need to do something different as quickly as possible and trying to move everyone to do that and really trying to create change and balance all the different needs. I think the last panel was more than emotional for me because in the last year, as you think about the crisis that we're in and then seeing kind of folks that have gone without for so long and recognizing that there is going to need to be a pivotal shift and I want everyone to move as quickly as I want to move, and sometimes that's difficult, and because I'm ready to get to getting on to doing better.
Mexico Interstate Stream Commission. Ali?
Thank you, Luke. First of all, our principal, Mr. Esteban Lopez, sent his regards and regrets for not being here, so you're going to have to put up with me today. With respect to discussions from last year to this year, I think the turning point was the Senate hearing that Commissioner Tutlan had last year. That essentially kick-started hard discussions that had to be had, but was on the fringes. Commissioner Turan, with her straightforward leadership, put that right at the table and then posed that to the entire nation. And so that essentially became the precursor for the initiation of the SEIS process. And then that was followed up by the Lower Basin States proposals that is now being reviewed by Department of Interior and Reclamation. So I think those are the good things that I see that have happened. Luke, the other good thing is, going back to the previous panel, more meaningful discussion and interaction with the tribes. Being in the Upper Basin, I have been part of, or I have seen many meetings, not just meetings for the sake of being in meetings, but also just elevating the discussion to the level that is necessary for that meaningful participation. So those are the critical points that I see in the past 12 months.
Great, thanks. Next up, we have JB Hamby, who is the chair of the Colorado River Board for California. JB?
Cool, thank you, Luke. I would say that well, first of all, start with the most challenging point of maybe this last year, and then move on to how that was a bit of a silver lining afterwards. For California, the last few weeks of January were less than pleasant, having the 6 other states versus California, California representing half of the population of this basin versus the other half that does not reside within the Golden State. So that was a very unpleasant time to be able to have this amount of division at a time when Reclamation was looking for a consensus-based framework alternative to be considered. Ultimately, we weren't able to achieve that. So having this split in the basin and one state being in this unusual situation, myself being a couple weeks into my role at the time as chairman of the board and commissioner for California, it was quite a baptism by fire. Fortunately, I would say that what has happened after that point is everything has been much better in comparison. So maybe a very good thing, because everything that's emerged from this point, particularly the relationships that have been built between the lower basin states and working to this point we've achieved within the last few weeks here, this historic accord that we've reached conserving nearly a trillion gallons, of water from now until the end of these current guidelines, puts us on a very effective path to start to develop the next set of guidelines. So that was the challenge, that was the thorn maybe, but there was a nice rose on top of it.
Great, thanks. Colby Pellegrino is up next, and she's the Deputy General Manager for the Southern Nevada Water Authority. Colby?
Trying to curse less in meetings. Thank you, JB. He said I've done well. All joking aside, John is not here today. He's in Toronto for the American Water Works Association, and he sends his regard. I think that, the year has been challenging in water on many levels. We think about the negotiations on the river themselves, but the stuff that enables the negotiations back home has been just as hard. We banned turf in all new development except schools, parks, and cemeteries. You cannot have live grass in our community. Telling luxury pool builders they can only build a 600 square foot pool was probably the hardest single thing we did. Followed by charging $9 per 1,000 gallons for exceeding the seasonal water use that's 10 times our normal residential customers' use. Has brought pitchforks to every public meeting we've had since then, even the ones that are not the appropriate board for that complaint. So overall, using less water is hard. It's hard at the local level. It's hard at this table. And it's hard amongst all of the water users on the river that have to figure out how to do less. I think the biggest challenge this year has been figuring out how we navigate what we're currently facing and stay together, working together, not litigating against one another, realize what we've done is wonderful and it's not enough. I was gonna use an F word in there and I stopped myself. So finding the right way to get through what we need to get through to protect us through 2026, while also realizing we need to meaningfully start changing the way that we're using water in this basin by 2026 in order to be successful.
Thanks, Colby.
Colby does the cursing, so I don't have to.
I was going to introduce, for those who don't know, Tom Bushatsky is director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Go ahead, Tom.
Luke, in terms of what's been challenging, and Ali talked about Commissioner Tootin's testimony, and for me, hearing 2 to 4 million acre feet on top of an Arizona, which in 2022 had already cut their use by over 800,000+ acre feet, and how that would relate potentially to things like CAP maybe going to zero under some people's impression of what the junior priority means, including, as Governor Lewis talked earlier, about the impacts to that tribe. But also a huge challenge for me that is always in the back of my mind is I got 22 of the 30 tribes in my state. So that lots of challenges moving forward. I think over last summer, when we got into the room to start to talk, part of what Commissioner Tootin had said is, if you all states don't act, I'm gonna. And it was early in July in meetings in which they said, never mind, no unilateral action And I think that was a huge challenge. Even with my own water users who were senior priority to CAP, looking at me like, hey, I'm good. You go figure it out. Junior priority users can go to zero. So huge challenge. I think moving forward, we were able to find a way to take advantage of the good hydrology without relying upon it to create a safe harbor here between now and 2026 in almost all of the possible hydrologic scenarios moving forward, maybe in a very few cases where that might not happen, but we have a backstop. And I think one of the great things, JB, that came out of the bad things that you talked about in January was in a couple of weeks after that meeting, JB and I met in Yuma and kind of just had a good one-on-one conversation. It wasn't really even business. It was just, let's lay our cards on the table personally, get to know each other and build a relationship. And I think that jump-started where we got among Arizona and California in the end where we are with this proposal we sent off to the federal government.
Thanks, Tom. And at the end of the table is Gene Shawcroft. He's the chair of the Colorado River Authority of Utah. Gene?
Thank you, Luke. Much of what I was going to say has been said. I'll try not to repeat, but just reinforce. Part of the challenge for me was to understand the significance of the decisions that were being made, affecting that many people, that many communities, that many issues with water is absolutely astounding. The impact that decisions that are made are hugely significant, and yet at the same time, we have to move forward. One of the things that I would tell you also from the home front standpoint is those decisions that are made we have to take them home. We have to still have a residency in our state when we get back. And so there's always some challenge with making sure that what we do works for the folks at home. It hasn't been mentioned, but it's extremely obvious. The hydrology was a pain in the rear a couple of years ago. It was absolutely horrifying to watch in a 6-week period of time, the forecast dropped by nearly 2 million acre feet. That's scary, that's horrifying. And to deal with that was, again, extremely challenging. To the positives, I agree with Tom 100%. We have developed some relationships that have to be developed in order for us to move forward. There are many, many more things we have in common that are different, that we see differently, yet at the same time, we've got to sort all of those things out. So I will stop there and let you go to the next one, Luke. As always, start with Becky again.
And I should say, we're taking questions. So if questions from you all come up as these folks are talking, please submit those and we'll have time at the end for questions from you all as well. But I wanted to start with the Lower Basin Plan, which is what we're calling it. That's the name. This 3 million acre feet of water, this goal that's been put forward, how do we actually go about doing that? Maybe for the Lower Basin representatives, where is that water going to come from? How soon is that kind of conservation going to be possible?
So look, I don't have all the numbers off the top of my head, but we've already had in Arizona, the Uranium community sign contracts for up to 125,000 acre feet a year. Fort McDowell, Yavapai Nation, 14,000 acre feet a year. Over 100,000 acre feet of CAP cities, and Commissioner Tootin talked about Tucson signing, a couple of the others signing. So it's all coming together in terms of the IRA money helping to fund on that side what's federally compensated, and we've got some outcomes already on the table for water that is not on the federally compensated side. There's 41,000 acre feet of water that Arizona Department of Water Resources and CAP paid water users in Arizona to not take. So that water is already in the bank. So it's coming together, in a big way. And some of that water, as those agreements have been signed, has already been reflected in the modeling in the 24-month studies that have been done. So I'm very confident we're going to get all the way there by the time the next version of the draft EIS comes out. And certainly by the time, as Commissioner Tootin talked about this morning, of the record of decision by the end of next year or the end of this year.
And then in California's context, last fall, California stepped up and was the first state to make an offer when the states were kind of at an impasse last year for a total of 1.6 million acre feet through the end of these current guidelines, about 400,000 acre feet per year. The current proposal for at least California under the lower basin plan is just that 1.6 million acre feet. So kind of working through our users in California, starting with the Palo Verde Irrigation District. There is a large-scale fallowing program that exists between Metropolitan and the Palo Verde Irrigation District. That water, instead of going to Metropolitan, would be flipped over and left in the river instead. In the Bard and Fort Yuma Catsan Indian tribe area, there's existing programs there between Metropolitan and those respective districts and tribe as well, leaving that water through those programs in the river as well, contributing a little extra perhaps as well. Then we have the Imperial Irrigation District, who already has a very large-scale conservation and transfer program as part of the quantification settlement agreement. 20 years on, still contributing and keeping California within its 4.4 million acre foot entitlement. That's 250,000 acre feet per year starting next year through the end of the current guidelines. This year is challenging because contracts still haven't been issued. And so that's really hampering the ability to get started this year. Coachella Valley Water District looking to leave water in the river that they would have otherwise been replenishing their groundwater basin. And then in the Metropolitan Water District, existing programs being flipped over to be left in the river instead. This has been greatly helped by the greatly improved hydrology, not just within the Colorado River Basin, but in particular, the enormous snowpack and rain and flood activity that's been occurring within the state. And then there's additional ICS that Met is going to be able to leave in the system from now until the end of the current guidelines. So that's 1.6 million acre feet of the 3 million acre feet for California, from California.
And I'll just wrap up with Nevada shares 285,000 acre feet of our unused apportionment or our tributary conservation ICS staying in Lake Mead.
You know, when we were here last year, it was right after the 2 to 4 million acre foot kind of charge to the states from reclamation. How did it go from 2 to 4 million acre feet per year needed to stabilize the system to 3 million acre feet for 3 years? How did it go from this kind of more permanent reduction needed to smaller amount of reduction on a temporary basis?
Mother Nature. I'm not joking. There's 6 million acre feet more water in the system today than the modeling that was done for the SEIS. This was, you know, the best year of this drought. This is not that Tom talked about this in his opening. We found a way to capitalize on the good hydrology. The 2 to 4 million acre feet that reclamation came up with, I think, was an appropriate contingency plan based upon some really dry scenarios playing out that we needed to be prepared for. As we look at the 3 million acre feet in the modeling today, plus or minus 200,000 acre feet, we do better than both of reclamation's SEIS alternatives because they were not designed to get water into the reservoir this high up. It contemplated the lake going down, and that's when the bigger shortages took place. So while it sounds like, oh, we didn't get to the goal, if the goal was the SEIS alternatives, we've done one better. And Mother Nature helped us out. That's why this is a really great bridge for us to get to work on 2026.
Yeah, I agree with Colby. We've lost sight of what the goal was when the commissioner testified. The goal wasn't about reductions. The goal was about protecting elevations in Powell and Meade. And we're doing at least as well, if not better. And we don't need as much water to achieve that goal. Post 2026, it's going to be a different story if we want to really stabilize the system. We heard Brad Udall's discussions and the need probably post 2026. to find a way on a more regular basis to build storage, not just stabilize elevations.
And I would also say, when we were at this point last June, actually this month, we were looking at a situation where there was a very real possibility of hitting dead pool in a very short period of time. Now, based on the latest set of numbers, even without this 3 million acre feet that the lower basin is contributing, 0% chance of hitting the critical elevations in either reservoir. This additional 3 million acre feet on top is a thick dollop of icing on top of that cake. So when we're going to be looking to start negotiating the next set of guidelines, this provides us something that's very helpful, which is the stability that we need, not to be focused on dumpster fires of the day and putting those out, but having a very clear focus and having a clear-eyed perspective of the problems that we're trying to solve without being distracted by the potential for catastrophic conditions.
Did the promise of federal money help in not just, the bad weather, the good weather? Was this, $4 billion in federal funds for the Colorado River? How did that factor into this?
So just recollecting back at the time, when this call for, first it was 1.5 to 3 million acre feet, a couple of weeks later it was 2 to 4, was coming about, at least in different circles in California. Something that came up and we had a discussion about was, considering just the QSA as an example, California was able to reduce permanently its use of Colorado River water by 800,000 acre feet a year. That was not free, and it was complicated to put together, and that was funded by the individual agencies themselves. There was no federal or state support to make that happen, to fund that conservation. That was all done between the individual agencies on a voluntary basis to make that happen. So those are large-scale, complex programs that are funded. So to do even more on top of that was going to be costly. And local agencies, kind of constricted. It's hard to go and make a rate case and do rate setting for this sort of emergency measure, not well situated to do that. State legislatures, not a great place to look. The only way to really get through this, looking at it at that time, was some sort of congressional appropriation to make that happen. So fortunately, Senator Sinema was able to make that happen, and that really changed the picture a lot. And this 3 million acre feet that's going to be left in the system is a huge improvement, and certainly the IRA funding made a world of difference. And for this near-term action, but also the bucket 2 funding that's going to be able to hopefully provide some long-term benefits as well.
I'd like to hear from the Upper Basin panelists what you guys think about the Lower Basin plan.
Let me just, Luke, before we go there, I just want to amplify something that Kobe said. When the commission was sitting a year ago and said 2 to 4, she was sitting there with knowledge of how poorly the forecast had reduced over the prior 5 months. And there was some extreme concern about Deadpool. When she made those statements, we got to remember that the forecast had dropped almost in half when she made those statements. She made those statements at the tail end of a horrible runoff that was projected to be not all that bad. We had a 95+% snowpack on April 1st, and yet the runoff was 60%. And the prior year, we had a 90% plus snowpack and a 32% runoff. And so Crystal Ball would say, if we get one more year like this, we don't have a plan. We don't have enough tools to solve this problem if next year is what the last 2 have been. And so we have to remember a little bit of perspective. And that perspective of horrible drought, continuing drought, 3rd year of La Nina, everything's going to go terrible. That precipitated a lot of decisions that we made even into the fall. Some of the things you'll probably talk about in a few minutes, but decisions that each of the states were making were based at that point on what happens if we have a 3rd year that's like the last 2. That was absolutely unbelievably terrifying. And so that's where we were. Fortunately, we're in an entirely different situation now. As far as the plan is concerned, I am anxious to see some more details. Contracts are being signed, as you heard. I think that's fabulous. We're trying to understand how that fits in, more detail. That's why at the end of the day, we couldn't all say, yes, we support the plan. We could get to, we support analysis of the plan, because we don't know quite how it's all going to shake out. But if you've got a plan that works better than the others that have been proposed, we're all ears, let's see it.
One thing that I would add to what Gene said is, he's absolutely right about the forecast, the grim forecast that was there. But Commissioner Tutin's announcement was also considering the actions that were going on at the same time or had been authorized. A number of actions had been taken by the Upper Basin States to protect levels at Lake Powell. Those had been approved by late April, early May. The same thing in the Lower Basin States. They had also, come up with all sorts of, conservation activities, mandatory reductions, but also voluntary actions to protect Lake Mead levels. Even with those, projections were so grim that Commissioner Tutin had to announce this in terms of being able to have the tools to protect the system. But I agree with the main goal that Tom mentioned, which is protecting the critical elevations. And now that there is a little bit of relief based on the incoming inflow into the reservoirs, that just allows to bridge this gap between now and post 2026, knowing that that's a whole different paradigm that needs to be dealt with.
I agree with what Commissioner Shawcroft and Ali said. I think it's going to be important to look at the new SEIS and analyze it when we have all the information. But once that's available, my commitment and my intention is to look at everything through that lens of protecting Colorado's interests as well as the interests of the 40 million people that rely on this water and the 7 states, the 2 countries, the 30 tribes. This is an incredible resource. I didn't need an SEIS to say that more was needed. We knew that. It just formalized it. And so we get to analyze that when it comes out. The crux of the issue is that more water is leaving both Powell and Mead than is coming in. And so it is not surprising when I said there's nothing new with what I'm saying. So I apologize for that, Luke. But I have always consistently said this money needs to be spent on permanent changes. This is the American people's money, and that we have to really use it to do better for the long run. And it has to be verifiable. We have to make sure that we're actually doing what we say we're going to do. And so when the SEIS comes out with this new alternative, of course we look at that. But as we go into the future, we have to be doing that too. There are a lot of people that are tired of hearing about the constant crisis that we're moving from crisis to crisis. And what they're looking to, the group up here, is leadership, and says and we need to be able to say we are doing something, we are taking proactive action, and we're doing it in an inclusive way. And we're doing it in a way that is providing a more secure and certain future for everyone.
The post-2026 guidelines, because one thing that I heard from at least a few of you is what this agreement does is it gives us breathing space, it gives us brain space. So let's explore that brain space of what is going into this next round of negotiations. I think the way that I would frame the question is basically as you're going into these what have been framed as much harder discussions than what were just had, what's on your wish list, and what's the deal breakers that's going to make you walk away from the table? And I'll maybe have each of you go through how you're thinking about this as you go into this.
So I think there's probably 4 or 5 things from a California perspective. I think starting at the top of the basin, we have to ensure that we're meeting the compact obligations. Don't think they're necessarily made up to the lower basin. The lower basin relies on those supplies to be able to serve people. So that's an important thing we have to determine and work out, is how Powell and Meade operate and what's released from Powell down to the lower basin states in Mexico. Then you move down to the lower basin, there is a deficit that takes place, and that was covered well today, about 1.5 million acre feet. Half of it is the lower basin responsibility to Mexico. That's not been something that's been entirely dealt with or figured out over time. And then you have the separate bit, which is the system and evaporative losses. The other half, about 750,000 acre feet, when you take the gains and losses, you net them out. There's some work that needs to be done in the lower basin. We have to continue our partnerships with Mexico and continue what is now a very positive process. There is ongoing minute that was discussed earlier in participation with Mexico to ensure that we have a full basin-wide participation to the next set of guidelines. But I think overall, an important thing we have to start off with is we have to have an effective process moving forward. There's some really high-level stuff that we need to determine. How long are these guidelines for? How firm are they? How much flexibility is incorporated into them? This is going to be a pretty expedited process. 2 years ago here in Denver, we had a kickoff Basin States meeting that was supposed to start this post-2026 process. We've not exactly continued that post-2026 process until basically 2 weeks from now, really, is when it's going to kick off, really. But we're going to have the remainder of this year to probably do some high-level stuff, and then the real work is going to take place over this next year, which is going to be a very expedited process to figure all of this out and put it together for reclamation to analyze at basically the end of this next calendar year.
Before we go to the next panelist, I heard an acknowledgement of the deficit in the lower basin. Is there a commitment to actually solving that deficit in the post-2026 guidelines?
So certainly you can't take out more than comes into the system, and there is a deficit. The question is how is that apportioned out? And so there's been different interpretations. January was an example of that, about different approaches to that problem. But I think there's going to need to be a serious set of conversations we'll work through to be able to ensure that we're living within our means in the lower basin, and be able to also have this conversation with the upper basin about what is due to the lower basin as well. There's differences of interpretation on both fronts.
Okay, who's next?
So I guess before we answer your question, Luke, which is what is the wish list? We first need to make sure we fully understand what the problem is in front of us. I guess you have heard this from literally everyone in the panels this morning, or many of us in the audience, that there's a mass balance issue in the Colorado River Basin. There's more going out than is coming in. And that gets manifested in the reservoir levels. But it's not just reservoirs. I want to tie back to what Nora McDowell mentioned this morning, which river itself as well. So that needs straightforward and understandable accounting. Evaporative losses, transit losses are part of that. You see in the 6 states letter to the Department of Interior agreement on that. There's also desire by California, as JB mentioned, to recognize that, but we understand there may be some legal hurdles. So I think there's common ground to tackle that issue, but before getting there, we need to agree on the mass balance issue that is out there.
Becky's pointing at me, so of course I have to say yes, I'll go now. So I'll keep it kind of more general, but I have some specific points too. So I'll say it this way: no matter what all the pieces of paper say since 1922, I believe that all of those folks in the basin who benefit from the system have to share in protecting the system and lessening the risk. Everyone, every water user. A couple things that I think need to be examined, and these are kind of already on the table in relation to that imbalance that Ali talked about, or are looking at what beneficial use means today in the Colorado River system. Is it what beneficial use meant historically? Can someone in Phoenix with Colorado River water their lawn 24/7, 365? My view is no. But when I say that to my folks, it's just one more set of darts that I pull out of my back every night. That goes to agriculture too, though, in both basins, right? And we have to look at evaporation and system losses. I've said this many, many times. Folks have heard this. Setting aside the pieces of paper, every individual water user that takes water off this river contributes in some way, shape, or form to the evaporation and system losses. And so from a physics standpoint and equitable standpoint, it's a great argument. I got entities in Arizona who are on record. 2 major water users wrote letters to the federal government that said, no way in hell, we'll sue the hell out of you. You cannot do that to us. So it's going to be a huge challenge to address the deficit, however we define what that deficit is going to be. As far as walking away from the table, I don't see anything that would make us eventually walk away from the table. We saw on the brink this past spring leading up into May 30th, a litigation conflagration coming in relation to the draft SEIS and the comment period. It's what partly drove us to our proposal, and I think we are going to avoid that similar outcome at all costs in relation to the post-2026 operating criteria.
Conflagration is a great band name, just in case. But Jude, go ahead.
That might be a Band-Aid bigger than we need, Tom. I don't know. Okay. Let me just, Brad made a couple of points this morning that I think I'd like to just chat about for a minute. Climate change, of course, impacts everyone. And I think there's been the point made that climate change can't be handled on the back of the upper division states. I think that's got to be spread. And as we've had conversations, that's not a point of disagreement. It's we've got a lower hydrology. How are we going to deal with it? So I think we're moving in a positive direction there. The other thing that I think we need to do is we need to be in a situation where we can deal with a extremely wide range of hydrologies. We've heard numbers all over the place. So the river may be here, it may be there. I'm not sure saying the river will be here and it'll never go lower is a smart thing to do. Obviously, if it were here and always higher, that would be a great thing a great problem to have. But at the same time, I don't think we ought to hone in on a number. This is the range. Beyond that range, we don't have a solution. I think that's part of what's gotten us where we are, is we never anticipated the range or the river would go this low. So I think that's something that we need to focus on. And I agree 100% with Tom, courts are not the answer. The people that need to figure this out are in this room. We need to figure it out. We have the ability to do that. Is it going to be easy? Absolutely not. But turning it over to a courts, in my mind, doesn't do anything but delay. Every decision will ultimately have to make at any point. So again, that is not an answer. We've got to get this thing figured out.
Becky's gonna go last. I think that the biggest thing on the wish list, and it's similar to what Jean and Tom both said, is we have to look at a realistic range of what the future might be. I think that's the most important thing for all of us. I think we're doing everybody a disservice if we don't. I think second to that, the way that these agreements have evolved have typically been, let's come up with the volume of what we need to do, and then let's divide it out and let's figure out how that gets taken care of at home. That's served us really well. But I think what this SEIS has also showed us is we're at the limit of the amount of reductions people are going to take in the shorts. And, there was a great question about how much did the money help? It didn't hurt, and we wouldn't have got there without it. So I think that's your answer on how much it helped. But there was a note in California's comment letter about, maybe the QSA needs another round in a different form. when we were building the SEIS alternatives. And I think there's some truth to that, that we've got to come up with some carrots and some sticks. Because we can sit and talk about our priorities and the compacts and how much is getting delivered and how much is not getting delivered, but that doesn't get us the programs that actually reduce water use in a meaningful way. We've got to come up with, whether it's a funding mechanism, whether it's a holistic suite of programs, we have to come up with some set of carrots that we don't have today that allow our water users to adapt to the changes that we're asking them. And I don't have all the answers of what that is, but coming up with 2 million acre feet of mandated shortages is going to ensure that a judge decides how this river is operated. So I think that's my wish list, is that we got to put our creative thinking hat on and come up with not only sticks this time, we've got to come up with some carrots too.
I think in terms of looking forward, and I'm excited about that. I think for me, it's important that the next set of guidelines really acknowledge that climate change is real, and it's resulted in significant changes to the Colorado River system. I don't think anybody sitting in the room can refute that, and that we must adapt to that drier but variable future. I think everybody here has talked about that. For me, water security is non-negotiable. And I think we have to be very careful about what that means and how we say it and what that means, because there's an equity component to that. Water security for some doesn't mean at the cost of others. And so all water users across the basin need to be secure and certain. The way we do that is not try to preserve the way that we are doing things now, but adapt. And the guidelines need to say that. Again, it cannot come at the expense of some and not all. The operations have to be sustainable. Absolutely sustainable, and be able to adapt to what we are seeing. To have that security that we're talking about, operations have to be aligned and responsive with what those available supplies are. And we're not doing that now. And so we have to do that. And again, the tribal voices must be heard, not only heard, but listened to, because we have to be able to rely on them for the expertise that they carry also. And so when I talk about what I want and absolutely have to see, my hope is the next set of guidelines reflects what the river is. And that the money spent on creating permanent solutions, that evaporation is not only accounted for, but assessed, and that these uses are in alignment with the available supplies, and that we operate this system like a river, not like a glorified plumbing system, that this is a river. This is the lifeblood of the American West. And I think it's important to recognize that taking more than it gives will only hurt us in the end. And so that is my expectation.
During the last panel, some of the tribal exclusion that's taken place as this river has been managed now for more than 100 years. How do you all plan on going about including tribes in this current process? And what sort of commitment are you ready to make today about how you plan on including tribes in that process?
I'll go. This is obviously, it's no secret, this is incredibly important to me. And so my struggle with this one is that what can we do that is longer lasting? And I think you heard the last panel talk about some of the good that is coming, but what can we make, what can we do that it lasts beyond us? And oftentimes what I see is that what we do is the prerogative of who's sitting in the room. And then, but the accountability piece of that needs to come into play. And so much of what we've done has been because of the people that are sitting there now. And so I think as states and the sovereign tribes, I think about the Upper Basin specifically because that's where I've been working in and with the tribal sovereigns, is that we have to figure out how to take the next step from our very good work that's happened. How do we solidify this? Not just so that I'm accountable or Lorelai's accountable, but that the ones after us are accountable to have these the constant, I don't want to say consultation because CT's there's a negative connotation with that, but really, how do we create something that makes us accountable to do the right thing repeatedly, not just because of who's sitting in the room. We've started some of that in Colorado. We've created, I don't want to say communication protocol, but we have made commitment with the Colorado youths on how we are to communicate. That is a step. It's not the finish line. And so I think that's the challenge that I came out of this last panel was, how do I raise those voices, but how do we do it beyond me? Because I won't be here forever. None of these people will be here forever, hopefully. And so, that's, we're supposed to bring in new, different voices. It's nothing against these people up at the table, but we are supposed to, like, it's supposed to change, right? If you want a new way of doing things, there has to be new people involved. And so we have to look at doing this better. And I think there is a lot to learn from the tribal voices, and we need to figure out how to solidify that.
New Mexico has been one of the most successful states to deal with their tribes. Now, I understand we don't have 23 tribes, so my hats off to Tom, but still we, since early 90s, we have been able to essentially settle water rights claims within New Mexico by the two tribes that we have. But I guess I just want to kind of zoom out a little bit and look at not just on a state-by-state basis, but entire basin. Colorado River Basin has probably one of the most jaw-dropping contrasts within itself. On the one hand, downstream of two large reservoirs, we have a huge economy, probably the 5th largest economy in the world, with respect to GDP. Yet there are parts of the basin in which people are struggling to access to clean water. So the access to, universal access to clean drinking water is real. Just imagine not having water when COVID has hit. You have to do the 20-second wash of the hand, and there's no water there to begin with. You have to ask for a water hauler to come 40 miles away, or you do that yourself. So I think we just need to make sure we look at that kind of perspective, equity perspective that was highlighted in the previous panel. I agree with Becky that nobody should be left behind. So I think just looping back, we are proud of the work that we are doing with the two tribes. The big project, probably the biggest water supply project in the state that we have is Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project, $2 billion project. Yes, it takes resources. In fact, I think just today, Senator Lujan introduced amendments to Public Law 11111 to allow for bringing in more funding to bridge the budget shortfall, rightfully so, because this project is long overdue and provides that equity that I touched on. So anyway, just wanted to kind of highlight that.
So I'll jump onto something Becky said about communication protocols, and I think they're really important. We've developed some really good relationships with several of our tribes, but not all of our tribes. And I think in terms of the communication, and we started out this with challenges last year. One of the toughest things for me in my job is we talk to lots of people, lots of stakeholder groups, and I always have a hard time distinguishing between the difference between you're not listening to me versus you're not giving me what I'm asking you or telling you to do. And in terms of communication protocol, we've got to figure that out. For me, if people have the opportunity to make their case in a legitimate way, and then the decisions fall, they fall. But it's really tough because people look at it like, well, if you don't do what I tell you to say, Tom, you're not listening to me. Whether I spend an hour listening to them or 10 days listening to them. And so that's going to be a difficult place to get past. I heard Governor Lewis's proposal. I am hugely respectful of Governor Lewis and have an incredibly good relationship with him. I actually live on the border of the Gila River Indian community, and I tease him about opening my bedroom window on 4th of July and watching his fireworks for free. But something that he proposed in terms of a process in which the 7 Basin State principals would be in a room with the federal government and the 30 tribes, and that would be the only time we could be in the room if I understood what he was proposing. That's pretty tough for me. If what he is proposing is when we're getting to a decision point, we need to be in the room, that's fine, but we got to have different levels of communication that build up to proposals that can come to that decision point. Similar to Arizona in 2018 and early 2019, delivering the drought contingency plan through what we call a steering committee process, in which we had 35 or 40 stakeholders and legislators in the room, kind of as the decision-making body, but lots of subgroups that would bring the ideas back and vet them through that group for kind of the final agreement on a package called the Arizona Mitigation Plan. So I still think there needs to be layers. I think there needs to be multiple tables, but I'm very supportive of an outcome in which the decision-making table has the Basin State principals, the tribes, and the federal government sitting together in that room.
Thanks, Luke. I think you're very much aware that the Upper Colorado River Commission, coordinating with Daryl and Matt to some degree, have been meeting with the Upper Basin tribes over the last year. That's a great step. We've been able to increase our ability to communicate. We've been able to chat with them about issues as they are happening. It's been a great thing. I would tell you that particularly in Utah, there are several tribes that are involved with Colorado River. I appreciate Christopher Tabee's willingness to share with you his frank assessment of where they are with the state of Utah. I have to admit that our communication between the state and the tribe has not been as productive as it's going to have to be. I was thrilled to hear him say there was a crack. So however big that crack is, I'm going to try to squeeze through and make sure that we can continue that communication and build on it, because we have to. We have no other option but to work closely with our tribes. The Ute tribe has of late been coming to our Upper Colorado River tribal meetings, which have been, in my mind, extremely helpful. And we're looking to go to Fort Duchesne in July and have another meeting there with them, along with the other Upper Division tribes. So we're excited about those things. I would tell you, with regards to a couple of other things, the Navajo settlement in Utah was recently completed. We're thrilled to have that done. It's funded. We're thrilled for that as well. Within Utah, in the last 2.5 years, we created the Colorado River Authority of Utah, and there is a seat for the Native Americans on that authority, which has been great. To the larger question of coordinating all around, there has to be some federal involvement. And we will continue to look along with the federal government for solutions and opportunities to spend more time together and communicate better. That has to happen. So thanks, Luke.
And then in California, really this longstanding partnership between the Fort Yuma Quechan Indian Tribe and the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, as President Joaquin mentioned, has been in place for a number of years and has been very successful. Back in January, when we were having various issues, there was a lot of alignment, in particular between the tribe and the contractors in California, and there was a unified approach there. Shortly thereafter, President Joaquin was appointed as the very first tribal member ever to the Colorado River Board of California. And as a result of that, there's been an even greater level of conversation, collaboration at the board level, and then between the contractors, entitlement holders, and the tribe in California, all sort of on the same playing field, all talking together, all contributing. So that's been at least our process in a very short period of time that's evolved in a very excellent direction in a short period. Other tribes here that kind of split the border between California and Arizona and Nevada would look forward to meeting the Chemehuevi folks in Fort Mojave and getting to talk and interact and learn more from you, being that you're partially within the state of California. CRIT, very close relations between the Imperial Valley in particular and Colorado River Indian tribes are historic sort of farming connections. And then agree in large part with Tom's comments there. We need to figure out an effective process. We have a very short period of time to be able to come up with the next set of guidelines. We've been dealing with just tinkering with the existing ones for a year at this point. So if we're going to be developing the next set of guidelines in a little over a year, we need to be able to have an effective process in advance so we don't have any hiccups or stumbling blocks that's going to necessarily involve the tribes. And we've got to figure out how we set up these different tables or different forums for different purposes. This has been, just in the context of California, a very challenging thing because everyone wants to be at the small table as long as they're at it. And there are a lot of big, important interests within California who all want to participate in Basin State meetings in particular, which causes some consternation from some of our other Basin State folks. So being sensitive to expanding a single table to a certain size might limit our ability to collaborate on coming up with and having real conversations that tend to happen on the small level. That's how we came up with the Lower Basin Plan that involved a small number of principles, talking high level, that involved a lot of deep work within our individual states, with our tribes, with our contractors, with our various entitlement holders and water users. But then we can't be making decisions in these sort of very small groups. We have to be able to make that happen at a much larger level. So there's this sort of balancing act we have to do in a number of directions and figure that out. I think that's an appropriate use of our summer here in the next few months, figuring that out so that we can really hit the ground running between all the various affected stakeholders to have an effective process, because we have a very short timeline moving forward here.
Great. I did want to go to audience questions, but first, just following up on that, because a few of you have referenced Governor Lewis's proposal. Is there anyone on this panel, maybe just a show of hands, who would be ready to support that specific proposal from Governor Lewis?
I don't know that a show of hands that's a yes or no, black or white thing. I think everyone would put their hand up in agreement that we need to have more direct tribal, Basin State participation together. And I think I would also like to suggest that the idea that the Basin States themselves drive the whole process is not a correct one, and it shouldn't be a correct one. And if you look at the 07 guidelines in particular, the Basin States submitted a Basin State alternative, but the feds didn't go with it and rubber stamp it exactly. There's a lot of parts of it that were taken in large part, but there were other stuff worked in as well. So I think we have the Basin States are sovereigns, we have the tribal nations who are sovereigns. We'll need to collaborate together. There's differences of views within the various tribes. There's differences of views within the Basin States. Sometimes just adding them all together doesn't necessarily clarify certain things. So we have to figure out an effective process how to get the sovereigns together to make effective decisions and have effective conversations. And conversations sometimes diminish in their effectiveness the larger the groups get. But there are some lessons that that we had back in 2007, where there was a lot of work groups, where there's interactions between different stakeholders at different levels, and they were able to work on individual pieces that contributed to part of a larger whole. So I think there's important process questions that we should all be cooperating and talking together about in order to get to the finish line effectively.
just going to defer the decision makers level to the decision makers, but with respect to the lower levels, that's already happening. And I just want to kind of commend all the work that Carly Gerla and her team are doing with respect to post-2026 pre-scoping. Pre-scoping happened last year, and a report was put out, and now, you know, in the interim period, the pendency of the NOI publication, they have been doing a number of technical meetings, and as part of that, essentially everyone is, you know, represented. So I think I have found that to be essentially a gesture from Reclamation. That it is their intent to drive this process based on the proposals that are out there. But obviously, like JB said, that's something that the federal government will need to weigh in as well. But the lower level, the technical discussions, it's happening at all levels with full representation.
With that, we might go to audience questions.
Donald, I'm here to be the transmitter of the Slido questions. We have a lot of questions from a lot of people. So we'll see what we can get done in the time that we have. Here's one for the California representative. What would it take, or what would need to happen for California to get on board with the basin-wide equitable shortage sharing?
So how do you define equitable shortage sharing, I guess, is a question. I think an equitable thing is everyone's doing something. That's an important thing to do. I think it's also equitable, particularly to, as we're working through some of these, let's break it down, I guess, in the lower basin in particular. So on the Mexico treaty obligation, we got to get through that. The Supreme Court laid it out pretty clearly how that process is supposed to work. We actually have to start implementing it. Then when you get to the system and evaporative loss thing, which I guess is a new way of saying that's equitable, Mexico, California, lower basin tribes kind of disagree that that's an equitable approach. Just sidestepping what the established law is. Eric Kuhn's paper does a good sort of historical background on this sort of thing. So everyone's going to need to have to do something. No one can be let off of the hook. And so from California's perspective, California's been a leader in managing to reduce its uses for a long time, which is a very painful process. There's going to be a need for all basin states and all water users to be a contributor to the future of the river. So equitable, I think that means everyone doing their appropriate share, which takes into account the law of the math as it is, but also the law of the river as it's been established, and making the two work together through an effective collaborative process.
Thank you. Next question, why should the federal, and this came up in a couple of different questions, why should the federal government pay the states to do what the states must do to use less water? Want to take a shot at that? We've talked about that a little bit. Luke has asked.
Well, I think I'll be brief. The challenge that has been articulated, I think Colby mentioned it, to go from X number of acre feet to Y, which is lower, can be painful, extremely painful, and a little bit of financial aid can facilitate that quicker than if it's a pure stick. And so I think it's a helpful step from where we are to where we need to go. I agree 100% that the money needs to be spent on things that are long-term and permanent. But at the same time, I think some money helps us get from where we are to where we need to be.
I'm just going to pontificate from a modeling perspective for a minute. The basin can weather really dry years if we have enough water in storage. And the problem with the guidelines is not the volume of the reductions that we're taking or when we're taking them. It's that once we take them, we don't have anything in place to bump the reservoir back up. So there's one view of this, that everything has to be long-term and permanent, and I support that with 80% of my mind. The other view is if you can come up with short-term programs that boost the reservoir up after you have a really dry year, you may be just as resilient with a whole lot less controversy. Both of them work, but finding the one of those that works the best is what's going to matter long term. And it's probably going to be a mix of both. So, you know, we owe one to Senator Sinema. Somebody said it before, for getting us that money. I know there were efforts to say that had to be long-term money, and they didn't win out. Because there are short-term things that need to be done to stabilize the reservoir. There's a ton of water we can save in long-term programs, but it doesn't get any water in the reservoir today. Those things take time, they take planning, they take systems and contracts that are not in place today in order to see those savings. So you have to be doing some short-term work when you see a huge dip in your reservoir storage, or else we're always going to live on the edge of catastrophe.
Anybody else want to respond? A couple of you have already touched on this, but the question is, would you please respond to the 38 sovereign idea for decision-making proposed by Governor Lewis from the Gila River Indian community? One thing I was really interested to hear, Colorado River Commissions have two states now have a seat for a tribal member on your Colorado River Commissions. That is striking. I was unaware of that. This question says, would the Upper Basin representatives be opening to add a tribal representative to the Upper Colorado River Commission?
My understanding is that and I could very well be wrong, there are more lawyers in this room than we may have more opinions than I have, certainly. But the 1948 compact established the commission as it is. Would I be opposed to having a conversation about adding a tribal representative? My answer to that is absolutely not. The question is, as Daryl has said 1,000 times, if you know one tribe, you know one tribe. And I think some of the miscommunication or some of the challenge that I have had is thinking that if we can get a tribal representative, then that represents all of the tribes. And I'm learning that is not the case at all. So the question is it a seat or is it a seat for each tribe within the Upper Colorado Commission? I think that's a broader question, not to exclude anyone, but how do you go about managing a system when you end up with multiple folks? It's the same challenge that we have or we've talked about with the 38. So having a conversation, absolutely not.
Okay, let's see, next on the list here is a single good water year is not a substitute for action. Why not fix the law of the river now before levels drop back into the red by 2027? You want to take a shot?
I'll take some umbrage with the question to a degree, because the law of the river is the compendium of everything that anticipates shortages. The problem is not everyone wants to see shortages happen that way. It's not necessarily politically feasible to do certain things that way or practically feasible, but handling those shortages is pretty well laid out. So I think if someone's giving a talk tomorrow on aggressive incrementalism, I think we're trying to speed through on this process. The lower basin going from where we're at to an additional 3 million acre feet in the system, that speeds us up quite a bit. That's a good increment of progress. And it's sort of stair stepping. You can't jump from one story to the next, but we're making some good strides to get up the stairs.
I don't think we throw that out, and that's not the intention of the renegotiation of the guidelines. The law of the river, the compact, is flexible enough to be able to respond to what we're seeing. We just have to have the willingness to do that. We also have to make sure that we're living within the means of the river. that equity component within the compact is still there. And I think it's important to recognize that without that, there's so much foundation in the law of the river beyond just even the compact. And so thinking that throwing it out and starting all over, that we're gonna do any better, like this has been a rough couple years as it is. Try throwing that out.
And I think to answer the question in the affirmative, you assume that there's some finish line that we all get to. This agreement is not perfect, but it's where we could all get to with the resources and the hydrology that we had while we avoided litigation. There's not some other finish line that we missed because we didn't put the effort in. I can assure you of that. But if the answer is change the law of the river and you cause any one of these states to sue the federal government, that's less certainty for everyone in the room. That's less cooperation. That's less water in the reservoirs. If we had to see the SEIS comments on the drafts that were there, it would be very difficult for a lot of us to talk to one another. So in order to continue to make the reservoir manageable and control our own destination, we have to avoid litigation. And there's no way to say that there was some other path here where we got to a better place in the time that we needed to, that didn't result in litigation. I don't think that's possible. If we had more time, yes. If we had more money, yes. If we had better hydrology, yes. Maybe if we had worse hydrology, we would have gotten something different. But we've managed the risk. And managing the risk in the short term is allowing for a more inclusive process to address the long term. There's 0% chance we drop below 1025. 0%. And anybody who's seen me has known I have been the one pounding the drums on we have to do more, we have to do more, we have to do more. By 2026, there's a 0% chance we drop below 1025. That means we've managed that risk, and that allows us to have a more inclusive conversation for the long term.
Sometimes talking about these reductions in places like this, we lose sight of what that really means. We're talking about huge impacts on people, on families, on their livelihoods. Farmers in my state, in Pinal County, who lost their CAP water already are telling me, I've got nothing to pass on to my family. We've been farming here for 5 generations. It's over. These are serious things. And when you put people in that position, they're going to fight like hell. You put them in a corner, they're going to do everything they can to scratch back at you. And so, as Colby said, you get done what you can get done, and there is no end point. The next set of guidelines isn't going to be some magical outcome in which we never have to worry about managing the river again, and we can all go happily into retirement, some of us who are close to that age. So we're always going to be needing to be vigilant in doing things and adding on to what we've created, no matter what the next set of guidelines looks like.
Just want to quickly echo what Colby said. Not only have we managed the legal risks, but also I know there is valid criticism of the law of the river, the 1922 compact, but I think it's also worthwhile looking at what we have achieved in the past, you can say 100 years or 60 years since both reservoirs were full. That has allowed the 7 states to meet their demands without any issues. So I think from that perspective, the goal of the reservoirs, meeting the demands, has allowed the states to do so without any legal or financial risks. So that said, I think again, the post-2026 provides that platform to be able to look out based on the lessons that we have learned. It is extremely important. I want to echo what Mr. Udall said this morning, not just regional lessons that we have learned, but also look at national level or maybe international lessons, similar basins, similar situations, and how can we adapt and adopt those for the good of the basin. But that should not come at the cost of throwing everything out the window and saying, we should start all over. There has been multiple benefits. Now, knowing the lessons that we have learned, we need to refocus and move forward.
Question? Okay, next question. None of the states talked about the environment. The Colorado supports most wildlife in the interior West, important to tribes, is losing health. What can be done?
I'll just give one context of the environmental side in California, at least. So the Salton Sea, which is an important resource for wildlife that enjoys flying from Argentina to Mongolia, this is an important issue that was part of the QSA. This was really the big sticking point. You have this massive lake, really the largest in the Colorado River Basin, if you look at the river's natural sort of drainage as well. And this was a big sticking point over that period of time. Fortunately, the state of California, after a number of years of foot dragging, has been able to start to develop some important projects, species conservation habitat being the largest one, several thousand acres in size. Salton Sea, less water being used in the Imperial Coachella Valleys means less water in the Salton Sea. Human health impacts, as well as the impacts to the endangered species that enjoy hanging out in the area and stopping by. So as part of this additional contribution here, there's going to be additional impacts on the Salton Sea. Fortunately, in partnership with the Bureau of Reclamation, recognizing that it was important for stakeholders in the area and for this environmental resource, that before moving forward with these large-scale conservation programs, basically, at least in the IID context, another 50% on top, it was going to have impacts on the Salton Sea. So as a result of those investments through the Inflation Reduction Act, that gave a green light to be able to move forward with this additional conservation, to be able to help mitigate those environmental impacts, at least to that body of water.
So I'll just add that I think probably there's different views of what bucket 2 allows or doesn't, but I know there's at least maybe some lack of clarity in how environmental enhancement projects can work for bucket 2, and maybe worse, maybe that the bucket 2 money can't do that. And so I think we need to use some of that money for enhancement of environmental projects as well. I'm supportive of that. But I think the short answer to the question is, if we stabilize the river system, either in the near term, as we've done through 2026 largely, or post 2026, it largely benefits the environment.
I guess I would just say that the environment always loses if we're continuing to have to take deeper cuts in water use. The only way that we can do right by the environment is to get more water in the reservoirs. Because when you pit the environmental resources against people's livelihoods, that never plays out well. Not within state government, not within federal government. We have laws, we have protections. They don't work unless we have a sustainable river. So I know that's not exactly what the question's asking, but I think the reality is we have to get out of emergency management if we're going to do right by the environment.
Sure.
One of the things that I think most people are aware of, but as water, for example, just as an example, when it was concluded that there would be water released from Flaming Gorge to Lake Powell to help benefit the elevations in Lake Powell, the flow regime was dictated almost exclusively by the environmental community. The releases, the timing, the flow patterns, et cetera, that was all fully not only vetted, but a large part of the decision of how that water would be released, when the spikes would occur, when the drops would come down, when the flows would be reduced. All of that was vetted through the environmental community and the environment in order to use that water to the best benefit as that water was released. So Some of you may know that, some of you may not know that, but that was the case. And this year, as recovery occurs, the same thing. There are flows, I believe today, are higher in Flaming Gorge to benefit the endangered fish. And then those flows will cut back down after that process occurs. So there are things that are occurring, but Kobe's point's spot on. If there's water in the river, it benefits everyone.
And for one more.
Okay, let's see. There are several comments and questions here about how do you anticipate making permanent reductions in use? I know we've sort of danced around that quite a bit, and maybe that's not a good way to try to wrap this thing up. But
I think that's the carrots and sticks, though, that I talked about. We've always looked at this as the size of what is the stick, how big is it, and whose responsibility is it? We have to come up with the carrots if we're going to make permanent reductions that aren't strictly based on priority and landing us in court.
Give them a round of applause. And thank you all.